will unsuspend after the dinner break, and we are with the Future Fund, and the call goes to Senator Hume.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to members of the Future Fund. Mr Combay commenced his role as Chair in June. There was a question on notice F056 that said that Mr Convey's first briefing as part of the onboarding process was held on the 13th of May and has had 3 meetings as part of that onboarding process. I'm wondering if that onboarding process, who that was with, was there particular topics of those onboarding meetings? So, for instance, was one on investments, one on governance, one on process or something like that? So perhaps you could just elaborate on those.
Thanks. So there's quite a well-established induction process. We tend to get new guardians every year or so. So there's a whole range of things for new guardians which largely go to the board's legal responsibilities to understand the legislation, the investment mandate, how we interpret the investment mandate, or at least how the board does, and how the portfolios are put together and various processes. For Mr Combay, because he was also chair, which means he's the accountable authority of the agency, then there were a suite of other induction topics to do with the operation of the agency, the people policies, the responsibilities under the PGPA Act and those type of things.
So there's some standard information that is given out every time there's a new change in governance. Has there been any other changes in governance since the Chair came on board?
So there's now, I think I mentioned last time, there's 4 new guardians out of 7 over the last 12 months or so. Given that, we thought it was prudent to actually take the board through a structured program to understand how we come to invest the way we do, so how we interpret the legislation, the mandate, various policies boards over the period of adopted, and so that's ongoing, but we think we'll complete that around the end of the year, calendar year.
And has there been any changes in reporting lines for the executive since we last met?
So in terms of people who report to me, no. In terms of people, like I report to the Chair, obviously, we've had some changes within the investment team structure.
Okay. What about the timing or the frequency or the nature of executive meetings or reports to the Chair?
So the Chair's working out of our office a couple of days a week. So it's an open plan office, so he has informal meetings with lots of people, but I meet him on a structured way once a week.
Okay. And there's no new reports that the Chair specifically asked for?
No.
Yeah, okay. Have there been any changes to the kinds of, I think that's probably the same sort of issue, products versus reports. I'm assuming that I can use those phrases interchangeably. Okay. What about any reviews? Are there any new reviews of internal positions or strategies or policies that have come into place under the guidance of the new Chair?
So as I said, the board is reviewing many of their policies right now.
Right. And is that a regular thing, or is that because of the change in Chair and the change in style?
It's more because the majority of the board has changed. And
right.
So there are things that we take as given typically when one new person would join that we need to make sure the board understands. So most of those relate to translating the investment mandate into a portfolio, but there are other policies that are under review too.
Okay. And is Mr Combay based in Sydney or Melbourne?
Sydney.
He's in Sydney. Okay. So what are the arrangements that have been made to accommodate the fact that the Chair is based in Sydney rather than Melbourne? Obviously, he's in the office 2 days a week.
We have an office in Sydney. So
you have an office in Sydney, so he's in there. He's there 2 days a week.
Yeah.
Okay. And how often does the Chair travel to Melbourne?
I'd have to check, but I'd say on average maybe once every 2 to 4 weeks, plus for the board meeting.
Okay. And there's been no changes to investment strategy?
Not out of the ordinary. I mean, we do refresh strategies as a general rule.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Minister, since the Chair took the new role, how many times have you met with him?
I met with the board And he was present.
Right.
When was that? August.
So once with the whole board?
Yeah, with everybody present.
But not with the chair individually?
No, that was with everybody.
Right.
I think there may be one other occasion, but I'd have to check that, when the chair was in Canberra and the Treasurer and I met with him.
Right, okay.
It was a sitting day, I think, so I'd just have to check.
That's fine. If you could take that on notice, that would be terrific. What about the Treasurer? Can we ask, I'm not expecting you to know off the top of your head unless you have it in front of you, how many times the Treasurer has met with the new chair?
Yeah, I have no knowledge of that.
Yeah, if you could take that on notice.
He was at both meetings I was at.
Yes.
So
okay.
there you go.
So 2 at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But perhaps you can ask that of Treasury tomorrow and they'll be able to answer.
Okay. So we spoke previously about the government's wish to, and I'm using Minister Watt's words here, representing you in the chamber, Minister Gallagher, to better align the fund's investment strategy with the legislative goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. Now, obviously, we've touched on this already with Senator Pocock's questions, but last estimates, Minister, you told this committee that this was a very minor thing and there's been no direction and no discussion. I just want to confirm, has there been any discussion since the last estimates between the department or the Treasurer or the Finance Minister or their officers with the Future Fund about better aligning its investment strategy with the net zero goal? And if so, what were the nature of the discussions and where they took place?
So we had a general discussion with the board, if I remember correctly, and we're putting some thinking around changes or amendments to the investment mandate, but we would be discussing those with the Future Fund board before it being finalised.
What sort of nature? What nature?
Well, I'm just telling you, you asked a general one about policy and things, so those discussions are ongoing, and when it's finalised you will have good
Right, so there is an
line of
intention to
sight.
change the investment mandate for the Future Fund?
We are having discussions about that.
Right, and is it to meet the net zero target by 2050 and to align the Future Fund's investment strategy with that government target?
Well, we'll have more to say when we've finished those consultations.
Well, that sounds like a yes.
We'll have more to say when we've finished those
When are
consultations.
you expected to finish the consultations?
I don't have a date I can give you.
Is the intention to change the mandate, the investment strategy?
It hasn't been, from memory, it hadn't been updated for a considerable period of time. So it is actually routine good governance to refresh and have a look at these matters. I don't know if you have the detail of how long it had been, but from my memory it had been...
The last investment mandate was updated in 2017.
Yeah,
and
so 7 or 8 years, 7 years or so.
And what was the nature of that change?
In 2017. I think that I'd have to check, but I think it was to change the return target to reduce it by 50 basis points because markets had changed.
Right, okay. And Dr. Hunt, have you been involved in those discussions to change the investment strategy to meet the net zero target?
So just to clarify, there's a process set out in the legislation for changing the investment mandate, and in a formal sense, the government would need to write to the board and put a draft mandate in front of the board, and then the board would consider it and has the opportunity to table a response in the Parliament. We haven't received any formal change or any proposed change to the investment mandate through that mechanism. There's a range of discussions that have been had with the department around different ideas and options, but nothing concluded.
Is there anybody involved in those discussions that had professional experience in investment markets?
Well, this is, happening...
So as part of those discussions, we don't characterise more as informal than formal. Our feedback on various options and how it would impact the investment program have been canvassed.
Right. So you've been asked your opinion as to whether you think this is a good idea?
I wouldn't put it that way. I'd just say if a change was made in this direction or that direction, would that have a material impact on how you invest and your ability or expectation of meeting the expected return set out in the mandate?
The decision to change an investment mandate is one of the Treasurer or the Finance Minister?
It's joint.
It's joint?
We have joint responsibilities.
And it's done through Cabinet?
I don't believe so, because it's in our role as shareholders.
Right.
But again, from a good governance point of view, this is a pretty standard, routine almost assessment of any any changes or amendments. And as Dr. Arndt said, there is a process that needs to be followed to go through.
So last estimates, when you said, and you told this committee that this was a very minor thing, that there'd been no direction and no discussion, that's moved on quite considerably clearly since then. And Minister Watt's words probably were true, that the government has a wish to...
You are drawing links here. You're asking me a question about whether any policies or any kind of frameworks are being updated, and so I'm answering that part of your question. You are now saying that you've determined it's this. I have not confirmed that.
Can you rule it out?
I'm not going to rule anything out because we haven't finalised it.
Is it an option?
I'm not talking to you about it because there is a process that we have to undergo. I'm simply being factually responsive to the question you asked about whether there had been or was going to be changes to any of these documents.
Is Mr Combe included in those discussions?
Well, I can't speak to that other than we had a general talk when we were in that meeting with the board.
So he hasn't been involved in separate discussions. You said that you had met with Mr Combe with the Treasurer during a sitting week.
Yeah.
Was that...
Well, that was when he was just incoming into the role, I think,
right.
from memory. Yeah.
And was that about... Did that involve...
No, there is no kind of, nothing untoward going on here.
Well, I know
that's
what you said
at
the last Senate estimates, and now you're telling us that there is.
No, I'm giving you updated information. Things do change in a period of time, Senator Hume, and if you want me to be responsive to your questions, I will be, even if that involves it being a new piece of information to what I gave in May or June.
Yeah, well, you shouldn't really have any choice as to whether you're responsive to the questions. Mr Combe said in an interview prior to taking the position as chair that there's a good opportunity with this change in the Board of Guardians and me coming in for us to make it a bit better known exactly where the money is invested and how. For example, is it assisting the energy transition? So has the fund taken any steps to change its reporting of the energy transition investments since the new chair came in?
Is that a question for me, Senator? We haven't changed our reporting. No, we haven't changed our investment strategy either, but we have, of course, been investing in assets that assist the energy transition for quite a long time.
Yep. Have you had discussions about how to highlight these kinds of investments with the chair?
So we did, in the annual report, we did talk a little bit more about some of the investments we have made that had been our past practice, but I wouldn't call it a report. It was just highlighting some of the investments that we'd made. We haven't changed any other type of reporting.
Has there been a suggestion from the chair or from to anyone on the executive that the Future Fund needs to increase its exposure to net zero energy transition related investments?
Not specifically. We've had broad conversations around the investment risks and opportunities resulting from sort of changes in policy and energy markets. So he's been part of those conversations.
Okay. It was reported in, and I think Senator Pocock mentioned some research that was done in an article that was written about that research, that at a press conference in Canberra, the Treasurer was asked whether there'll be any changes regarding the fund's investment mandate to take into account net zero ESG. And he said, "We are in discussions with the Future Fund about what the future of the Future Fund looks like, as you would expect. It's a very different beast from 2024. And when it was set up by Peter Costello, any responsible government looks at what the Future Fund will look like in the 2030s and what it will look like in the 2040s. We've had some discussions about that." So what was the nature of those discussions and with whom were those discussions? Minister, I'm assuming that they're with you.
I can't answer, though. It's a quote from the Treasurer. It's in line with the information I have given you tonight.
Well, yes, it is. But if the conversations weren't with you, who were they with?
Senator Hume, I know that.
Well, have I had discussions with the Treasurer about Future Fund? Yes, I have. Have I met with the Future Fund and the Treasurer? Yep, twice that I can recall in the last little while. Hardly earth-shattering news. You would expect us to be doing that.
Yeah.
And that is in line with what I've said tonight and the comments that you've just read. But I cannot speak on the conversations that the Treasurer may have had with staff or board members of the Future Fund.
Senators, I just wanted to draw your attention that this is the time at which we said we would move on to the Department of Finance with the Special Minister of State.
But you gave the Greens 25 minutes with the Future Fund.
No, I'm not seeking to wind you up. I'm actually just seeking to manage
You've had 90%
time.
of the time
I'm
today.
simply seeking to
95.
manage time and inquire as to how much longer you think. How many? Well,
Depends how many
you can't.
questions we get.
Yeah.
Well, I will
Spend
take my
hardly any.
time in resolving this question. Senator Hume, can I ask how many topics you might have to go through with the Future Fund at this point in time?
Probably about 10 minutes.
Chair, we said
Thank
to
you. I really appreciate that
We said to you
clarification.
beforehand
And what
was
about...
Chair, we said to you before we had about 30 minutes for the Future Fund and we had about 30 minutes for the Digital Transformation Agency.
Thank you.
If you let us just run with that, we'll get it going.
You've had a pretty good run, Senator Colbeck. There's hardly any interruptions today.
And apart from
Pretty small.
interruptions that aren't necessary.
Apart
like
from
we just
the
had.
chair. All right, well, I'm not...
But when the
Senator McGrath, I know you're just trying to wind me up, and I can keep taking your time here now by speaking as chair, because you know I've been more than generous in the way that I have given the call out. All I was doing was trying to resolve for my own mind when we might be moving on. And I can keep talking, and now I will finish talking so that you can move on to the next set of questions.
Well, that was illuminating. Thank you.
No, I didn't intend for it to be illuminating. I intended for it to be to have its intended effect of you waiting and having to wait in order to resume our work. All right, Senator Hume, off you go.
Thank you. Mr Arndt, did you have conversations with the former government or the government prior to Mr Combe taking on the position as chair about how the Future Fund should be operating and specifically its investment strategy?
We would brief the government from time to time about what we actually did.
Right.
But the government, to my knowledge, never told us how to invest.
Thank you. Can I ask, government business enterprises, are you subject to the new disclosure reporting requirements that were legislated recently?
About what?
The climate disclosure.
Climate disclosure, sorry, yep, yes.
Well, my understanding is, I'm not sure under which limb, but that we will be reporting, yeah.
Okay. Have you done any work on how you might need to go about doing that, whether you're going to need to take on more people, whether you need to get some advice, and from whom that advice might come?
It's preliminary because we haven't yet received sort of the template of what the report has to look like.
Right.
But we are tracking the corporate reporting standards and assume that we would be required to report something similar to, for example, super funds.
Yeah.
So we are working on that currently, and we have, I think, approximately one person. It's not one person with one job, but approximately one person.
Does the Future Fund do other forms of reporting that you might find say a listed company does around, say, WGEA reporting or modern slavery reporting or all those sorts of things? Do you calculate how much that reporting costs the Future Fund each year?
Not specifically, no.
Do you know how many people do that reporting for you?
I'd have to think about that because there are people right across the organisation involved. So we have some people in our corporate affairs team who work pretty hard to put the reports together, but they draw on other expertise across the organisation to supply the information.
Do you think for the next Senate estimates, obviously I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you could, and I'm not asking to put this on to put this on notice, just for the next estimates, when you come, could you come prepared with an indication of how many people work on that reporting and what your estimate is of the cost to the Future Fund of doing that reporting is, and if possible also an estimate of what you think the new disclosure requirements might also end up costing the Future Fund when that comes into effect, which I think is not until 2025.
Sure.
Yeah, that would be terrific. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I do believe we've concluded now the Future Fund.
Could have done it 10 minutes ago.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate the committee moving that through that swiftly, and the Future Fund, and the opportunity to take a dinner break before we came back. We now invite the Digital Transformation Agency to the table. Now welcome Mr Chris Fechner, Chief Executive Officer, and other officers of the Digital Transformation Agency. I'll give you a moment to get settled in. I believe Senator McGrath is leading for the opposition on questions. Mr Fechner, do you wish to make an opening statement?
No, thank you, Chair.
Senator McGrath, you have the call.
Thank you, Chair. I'm touched. Thank you for coming along this evening. I just want to discuss the outcomes of the trial of the Microsoft's Copilot product. We've discussed this in previous estimates, so this probably won't come as a shock to you. The formal evaluation report of the trial noted that there were, quotes, concerns related to vendor lock-in, end of quote. Minister, do you share that concern about vendor lock-in?
Well, we're certainly trying to encourage a broad range of businesses and technology have the opportunity to work with government. But we are reliant on some systems, I would say.
So in terms of Microsoft, you know, they sort of had a bit of an advantage, didn't they?
Well, a lot of our systems, I think, support Microsoft, don't they, across the APS? So,
and I suppose that comes to that there is vendor lock-in because they're in place. They have an advantage ahead of other suppliers.
Well, I think the trial was given to us at a bit of a discount, so that's what part of the agreement that was reached, but I am aware that there's a number of different AI tools that are used across government, and the DTA's been doing quite a lot of that as they've been finalising the responsible use of AI policy across government. So it's not just one technology that's being used.
Senator, the evaluation was looking to find out how the generative AI could be used across the Commonwealth, largely in that productivity space. We have a whole of government agreement for Microsoft Office, and Copilot works directly with Microsoft Office. So there was an easy vehicle for us to do it, and there was, as the Minister called out, a discount that was offered to us, and we had very high interest from across different areas of the APS to actually test this, so we thought we'd do it in a coordinated way. But what the evaluation found is that Copilot, in Microsoft's case, is not the answer for all things, and that there were several parts of the Australian Public Service that were looking at different uses of AI or different tools from AI outside of that environment. And in fact, the report does not recommend broad adoption of Microsoft's Copilot in it, but it did identify that generative AI tools could actually aid productivity across the APS.
Before we get further into the report, Before the Prime Minister announced the co-pilot deal, can you remind me, did the DTA undertake or request analysis as to whether another vendor could have offered their products for the purpose of an AI trial?
Not at that stage, no.
So why was that?
Because the offer had been made around the extensions of Microsoft Office, so the integration of the products inside of the Microsoft Office environment. That was the solution that the whole of government uses for productivity. So we have about 180,000 licences deployed across Microsoft Office, and trying to get to the point where we could assess it for security, integrate it with our environments across all of those different environments would have been prohibitive, and it would have delayed our understanding of whether generative AI was going to have a positive impact. We have the opportunity now, and we will continue to look at alternatives to generative AI in different contexts, not just for things like productivity, but how other types of AI can be used safely and responsibly across the public service.
So to confirm that there was no formal procurement process for the trial?
So there was no requirement for a formal procurement process because of the existing agreements with Microsoft under the single seller arrangements on our volume sourcing arrangements that have been in place for, I think it's 7+ years, but I'm happy to confirm that number on notice, at which point there is an option within inside that contract framework for additional products. This was the Microsoft Copilot trial was done as an additional product, which does not, as per the other Microsoft products, require full enrolment, which allowed us to just go with the 7,500 pilot size.
So does it create a precedent for taking into account what you've just said in terms of the licensing? Doesn't that give a precedent to existing vendors to run trials within the APS? This is what I'm trying to get to, that it gives effectively an unfair advantage to existing vendors within the system, especially if you're not running a procurement process.
Senator, there are in technology there are some dominant patterns that have got such broad adoption that it is difficult to get the same degree of quality, availability, deployment ease. And as I said, we have the single seller arrangement with Microsoft because of the vast commitment that the Commonwealth has for it, not because of Microsoft Copilot, but because of its dominant position worldwide in productivity. There are other spreadsheet providers, there are other word processor providers, but they do not have a broad representation in the Commonwealth. So the purpose of this was to see how generative AI would improve productivity, and to try and deploy it in a different productivity environment would have probably compromised the purpose of the trial.
So the report found, I quote, use of Copilot enabled some participants to access documents they should not have had permission to access. Trial participants raised instances where Copilot surfaced sensitive data that staff had not classified or stored appropriately. This was largely because their organisation had not properly assured the security and storage of some instances of data and information before adopting Copilot. So I'll put this question to you, Minister. One of the government's own AI ethics principles is reliability and safety. AI systems should reliably operate in accordance with their intended purpose. Noting that the report found that there was unauthorised access to documents, would the particular agency where that breach occurred, would that mean that that agency had breached the government's own AI principles?
So you're talking about the policy for responsible use of AI and how it intersects with the Microsoft Copilot trial?
Yeah.
And I think there's probably, this came, the responsible use of AI, when did that come into effect? 1st of September. So it, and that sets those 5 key areas of be accountable, notify the DTA in certain circumstances, be a contact point for whole of government. Yeah, so these are some of the responsibilities. Sorry. I'm not aware of unauthorised access that you speak of.
Senator,
I don't know if, sorry, Mr Fickner can
if I can
add.
Clarify.
Yeah.
The way that certain documents are actually used by generative AI is through a technical tool that connects to our internal document repositories. That is existing. So that's used through a product called SharePoint, and SharePoint stores lots of files. Now, SharePoint automatically puts classifications on files in particular spaces. The way that classifications on files was, in some cases, less well known than others. So documents that have always been available to people, because remember, it was very important to note that documents could not surface to somebody who they were unauthorised for. It's just if they were not classified, they could surface. And this was one of the things that we saw about the many implementations of Microsoft Office and across the Commonwealth, that there's a fair degree of variation in them and a fair degree of differences in the way that they classify documents. Some are open by default, some are secure by default.
So what you're saying is it's not the fault of AI, it's that the documents themselves, the documents were, as per the quote I read out, were not properly classified by the particular agency.
So what I am saying, Senator, is that in certain circumstances, particular directories inside of SharePoint could have been open by default. Now, they may not have been intended to be as broadly open as they were, but the AI actually doesn't qualify. If the person has access to the content through the authorities and it's not explicitly denied, then it will actually surface that document, even though without the AI that document may have been impossible to find.
Well, I suppose that's the point, that AIs enable some people to, if they're not properly classified in terms of the appropriate settings, that AI can assist.
It did find some learnings that we would look to do in terms of being able to improve the way that we deploy Office 365 tenancies. And we also have done significant training for each of the areas about what they should do if they actually get unexpected results, including, and the final point, Senator, is that Microsoft's Copilot actually runs within a closed system. So even though it was surfacing information inside the APS within an agency, it was not exposing that information outside of the controlled area, which was IRAP certified as a result of the pilot.
In relation to this, did you provide a brief to the Minister on the evaluation report?
Yes.
Okay.
And the report.
And the report.
Yeah.
And the report is publicly available.
Yeah. And Minister, you would be concerned about the two aspects of the poor record keeping, but also the fact that AI can allow those documents to come to the surface?
Well, I think obviously there's other requirements on agencies about record keeping and protection of information, and so that nothing that the Microsoft Copilot would waive any of their existing responsibilities for which they need to be accountable. I think one of the things where there are issues identified through pilots like this, it means you are able to respond. That's an important part of ongoing good governance.
Can you list what participant agencies where the unauthorised access took place?
Senator, I think unauthorised is a misclassification. It is unexpected rather than unauthorised. If the documents were secured, they do not surface.
Okay. So in what participant agencies did unexpected documents access to unexpected documents take place?
So I might actually pass to Ms Poole, who's got some more details on that.
So, Lucy,
Do you want to just introduce yourself?
yeah. So, Lucy Poole, General Manager of Strategy Planning and Performance. Senator, the survey process that we used as part of the evaluation was anonymised, and so therefore we don't know the specific details of those participants that were expressing a perceived risk associated with that issue.
But you'd know which agency, though, because surely I take it that the participants who participated in the evaluation report, that their responses were anonymous. But I'm asking about the agencies where the unexpected access took place.
So, Senator, I should stress that as part of the survey, it was a perceived risk identified by the participant, not in fact that there had been breaches of security. So that is an important distinction to make. And also, I've just confirmed with my colleague that in fact the survey was anonymous.
Yeah.
A series of sessions, face-to-face sessions, were held with participants also as part of that methodology that supported the evaluation. And certainly I can take on notice whether or not specific agencies were identified as part of that.
And Senator, just to extend that, before the trial got away, so the independent assessment of security was undertaken and the results published in the Microsoft Trust Store. That is a mechanism that basically put together all of the existing security requirements of Microsoft 365 environment and added the implication of Copilot to it. So independently, it was certified up to protected level. So that the controls that are in place were sufficient for it to be used in a pilot across the APS.
So you're saying that in terms of the different classifications of official, sensitive, protected, secret or top secret, that anything above protected did not have unexpected access?
So we had clear instructions that that the information classification was a key requirement, and again, most of the environments that we're operating in operate in their productivity environments to that protected level. There is very few connections to technologies in the secret and above.
Okay.
And certainly not accessible by Copilot.
Would the access to these documents, would that constitute a data breach?
No information went outside of the organisation.
So no personal information of anyone was...
No, and as part of the ongoing performance evaluation, there is a privacy impact assessment group that's continuing to work in the space of ensuring that we've got the right controls to protect personally identifiable information inside of the Commonwealth.
And you will take on notice that the agencies where the unexpected access happened. The report also went on to note that while Microsoft has provided assurance that Australian user data is housed in Australia and is not used for training models, can you confirm that all user data did remain in Australia?
So the part of the assessment requirements was that in the Trust Store talked about what they called the service boundary of Microsoft, which was domiciled in Australia. Now, the actual AI model itself is not domiciled in Australia. It's domiciled in the United States, and the service boundary protects information that comes from the Commonwealth from leaking into that model. And that's the assertions that came through both the IRAP but also Microsoft's own work, because underpinning the Microsoft Copilot is OpenAI's GPT models. So there is a degree of Microsoft and GPT and OpenAI have got a partnership about deploying that in the space.
So no information would have been used for training models or anything like that?
So no.
No. Okay. But you're definitive in that no information would have gone overseas?
To the best of all of the assurances of all of the provision that happened within the independent IRAP assessment, Microsoft's assertions and our inquiries, yes, Senator, that's true. No information went overseas.
Now, the report also noted that, and I quote, others noted their agencies were confident in co-pilot's data security arrangements and allowed sensitive information to be used. Do you know what type of sensitive information that those respondents would have been talking about, or...?
Not specifically, Senator, but undertaking that that the environment was certified up to protected level, which meant that anything that fitted within that classification could be used within the test.
So you wouldn't know the nature of the sensitive information apart from the classification of up to protected?
Yes.
The report also noted that, and I quote, it is unclear whether transcriptions are subject to freedom of information laws. Were the outputs of co-pilot subject to FOI requests?
So, Senator, there is still an emerging requirement to understand the impacts of the archives requirements and the records management. We have working groups that are currently looking into that. This is not a new problem. Microsoft, within the Microsoft Teams product, has had transcription services before. What's been added to it with Copilot is things like summarisation and intent extraction, where it actually interprets the outcomes of those transcriptions. But the consequence of things like video conferencing is actually a new sort of capability that has that problem about what forms a record and what doesn't. So being aware of this issue in terms of the application of FOI, would that have been a reason for the trial to not proceed? No.
No. Minister, do you have a view in relation to how FOI needs to be made fit for purpose in terms of dealing with AI and some of the learnings that have come out of the co-pilot trial?
Well, I think this is an area, obviously, the government's going to have, the public service more broadly is going to have to develop over time. So we're starting, we've got pilots, we've got the responsible use of AI policy to guide some of those decisions across government. But, as the technology changes and, our government systems are going to have to adapt.
And, Senator, I might just add to that, the Office of the Information Commissioner has recently released some additional guidance that they believe is appropriate in the space of freedom of information and the requirement to make that transparent.
Do you have a working group within the DTA to deal with this, following on from two answers ago?
We have a working group that's looking at the impacts of records management in conjunction with the National Archives, and we have a working group that's working with the Attorney-General's Office with the privacy and information protection requirements.
When do you think the working group would come forward with some recommendations or conclusions as to...
So my understanding is the working group on the privacy impact assessment is coming to the conclusion that there is still appropriate controls that are in place around there. The freedom of information impacts, I don't have any direct timing on that, Senator.
Minister, are you aware of any concerns raised by the CPSU about the conduct of this trial?
I have some. I'm not sure about co-pilot specifically, but obviously the union is interested in the use of AI across the APS, and so would be involved, I think, in...
Have you met with them over AI?
Not specifically, no.
Okay.
No.
So they've not written to you about AI?
I would have to check that. I get a lot of corro, but I would have to check whether they've written about it. I've certainly seen something from the CPSU about AI.
And Senator, the DTA has met with the CPSU twice as part of the undertaking of the pilot. So at the commencement of the pilot, we briefed them on the intended approach, and then prior to the release of the evaluation report, we also met with them to provide them with some early notice of the findings.
What concerns were raised?
So I wasn't at the meeting, Senator, so I can't speak directly, but I am aware that the union has expressed concerns about potential job losses as a result of the introduction of AI.
They also, my office doesn't believe we've had any correspondence from them, but they also had some I think they've raised some general concerns, and it perhaps might be through their own media on use of it in recruitment.
Okay. In what way in recruitment? can I ask?
Well, I think in
Sorry, people
in recruitment processes,
Okay, right.
you know, like going through CVs and things like that.
Okay.
Having so obviously there'll be further discussions with all unions involved.
Okay. Thank you. I might move on to the next topic, which is... Sorry?
Wayne Poole's General Manager of Digital Investment Advice and Sourcing. Just to clarify a couple of points, we've had an agreement with Microsoft since February 2009. The other thing with regard to the procurement, we were able to vary the existing contract with Microsoft when we did do a value for money assessment as part of that process.
Pretty sure I know the answer to this question, but how much did the co-pilot trial cost?
So, Senator, like every contract, we have small, medium and large entities. We won't reveal the prices and discounts.
Can you actually say what the percentage discount was?
I think Mr Fechner may have been on the record previously, but I'll just confirm that on notice what has been discussed.
Thank you. Right, if we go on to performance benchmarking, please. Now, previously we've discussed this, and it's with the investment oversight framework, and I note that for the second consecutive year, the agency has not achieved its outcome, with only 61% of digital investment proposals identified by the DTA as in scope of the IOF were reviewed within budget timelines. So how many proposals were reviewed within budget timelines?
So, Senator, I'll defer to Mr Poles in a second, but we generally look at hundreds of proposals for each budget and MyEFO that go through, not all of which actually make it through to the budget process, not all of which are actually identified in terms of their level of readiness at a budget process. So the measure that the DTA has set is that we have an aspiration to look at all digital investments to see if there's opportunities for doing them more efficiently, to streamline them, to make them aligned to policy. But it's not a fair assessment to say that just because it hasn't happened prior to budget that the DTA doesn't continue to work with agencies at our assurance and benefits realisation process. So while prior to budget we may have only looked at about 60% of those, during the rest of their deployment process the DTA steps up engagement. So once they've gone through an approval process, the DTA works to make sure that there's an effective assurance plan, effective benefits things, and during the life cycle of those projects that we apply our assurance models and escalation protocols to work with the senior responsible officers to achieve the result that was authorised.
And so would you get that to 100% then?
So
in terms of your aspiration?
There are thresholds associated with the work that we do as well. There are also levels of risk that we undertake as well. So some particular proposals are well structured, well understood, versus ones that have got a higher degree of ambiguity. The DTA makes resource allocation priorities to make sure that we look at the ones that have the highest risk or the highest impact and apply our resources to those.
Because in your annual report you do note that while proposals were submitted on time, many, I quote, many proposals do not fully satisfy the requirements. I suppose let's go. So how many proposals would not, at that point, would not fully satisfy the requirements then? Can you give me a number?
So, Senator, we wouldn't normally sort of talk about how many actual proposals, so hence the reason why I use a percentage term, because otherwise we're sort of revealing a little bit about the process of government. And so that's...
It's about... But I don't think the raw numbers would revealing a secret as such.
Well, I'm happy to defer to others, but we've been comfortable in terms of presenting it in percentage terms. as we have in the previous report, and hence the reason why our metric is structured that way.
I think I would like to get raw numbers, so I'm happy for you to...
Let's see what we can provide.
I'm happy for you to take it on notice, but it's, you know, it's, I don't think you've got anything to hide here. I think what you're doing is a good job, and so I don't think you should...
Senator, I should probably also talk, when you're talking about the numbers, there are things that are subject to other discriminating factors other than the DTA's assessment of those as well. There's finance, there's home affairs for some cybersecurity. So we work with other groups to also provide our advice into those, so government has a consolidated view of the proposals coming forward as well.
So how would you define highest impact? You mentioned that before.
Well, we will look at dollar size, we will look at length of project, we'll look at the impact of the things to applicability of policy outcomes from the government. We will look at risk, we'll look at the vendor environments, we'll look at the readiness of agencies to do it, we'll look at external factors like the availability of resources, the maturity of the solutions that are coming in. There is a very wide gamut, and we also apply the lens in prioritisation around the data and digital government strategy to see that it's aligning with the missions and enablers of the strategy.
Well, when I read the quote out before about how many proposals did not satisfy the requirements, you've sort of touched upon it, but in what way did they not satisfy your requirements? Are you able to...
I'll just make a couple of opening remarks and I'll pass to Mr Poles on this one. The DTA has the investment oversight framework, which we've discussed in this forum before. It continues to evolve. One of the things that we've been looking at is around our readiness for investment. We had an aligned requirement, and this is where I think you've got the 10% sort of number from. Through experience over the last few years and through continuing to grow out our assurance and our prioritisation functions, we think that that single dimension doesn't represent the best advice to government. We're now thinking about many more dimensions rather than just alignment to the 6 or 7 policies that were the original view of the digital capability approval process or assessment process, the DCAP that we call it in shorthand. We've continued to work with agencies to get their feedback. We've continued to work with different groups to get best practices involved in that. So in our annual report this year, we made mention of the fact that we're changing some of our performance measures around the evaluation of projects, and that's undertaking this maturity assessment that we've been going on with agencies and other entities for several years now.
I suppose that goes on to another performance measure, which is 2.5, which you have a target of 50%, but only 42% of proposals examined were assessed as being aligned with Australian government architecture. Why was this KPI not met? You're probably going to repeat yourself here a bit, I imagine.
So a little bit about the maturity of the Australian government architecture itself. So the architecture has been a project of the DTA for a couple of years now, and we have Mr Tom Marwick here who might want to go into some details of it. But the intention of the architecture is to allow us to classify investments into particular categories to see if we can get opportunities for reuse or to see if there are existing solutions that work in a particular space. Government does not have a high number of reusable components outside of things like MyGov and GovCMS and digital identity. We believe that there's a high value in government actually creating more of those components to be used across government, but it takes time to do so, and it also takes maturity across agencies to know where these things are. So part of our work with the Australian government architecture is to make these opportunities for reuse more visible than they've been in the past. So I might pass to Mr Marwick just to maybe talk about a little bit more on the architecture and how it's evolving.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Mr Fechner, sorry. Tom Marwick, Acting Branch Manager, Australian Government Architecture and Policy Branch. So the architecture is about an 18-month-old project for the DTA. As the trusted advisor for government, this is a centralised point where we can standardise policies, standards, designs and patterns into a centralised place, which makes it easy to discover for agencies across government as they build out new proposals, encourage reuse. We are currently going through a process of engaging heavily with agencies and with users across government to understand how we can best deliver that advice to them to make it consumable and to deliver and implement it through the investment oversight process.
So this goes to the other previous question I've asked you to take on notice, but in relation to the agencies, you mentioned the word maturity. It's also accountability here in terms of agencies. If they're not up to standard, I'm not saying you're running a protection racket for them, you're not. You're trying to help them, you're doing the exact opposite. Yeah. But I think the having a bit of sunlight on the agencies who aren't up to standard in terms of the proposals they bring forward to you might encourage them to be better performers rather than you having to continually...
Yeah. The ERC shares your view, Senator McGrath.
Okay.
And, you know, we know, and I know as Minister, some of the areas that DTA spend a lot of time either chasing or, you know, seeking engagement. It's a work in progress.
So
we're not at the name and shame point of view at this point, but there are agencies we would like to work closer with the DTA.
Well, speaking of which, can you talk to Parliament as well about that?
On notice, in relation, I'd also like the agencies who were aligned with Australian government architecture and those who weren't, in terms of that particular benchmark of yours. Now, if I can then move on to the next topic, please.
Just to clarify.
Sorry, yep.
The request there. So that alignment would have been subject to a budget process. So the degree to which we're able to provide that advice, I suspect, is going to be limited.
We'll see what we can provide you. We know the vibe of what you're after.
Well, the ERC and Senator McGrath are on the same wavelength. So
it's a rare but joyful occasion.
Yes, very rare and very joyful. Can we please go on to digital project data, please? Now, according to FOI number 19, submitted by the Shadow Minister for Government Services, the DTA submits, on occasion, assurance escalation reports via ministerial submission to the Minister of Finance. Unfortunately, the agency hasn't been able to complete this request yet, despite a time extension being granted. I suppose my question is, what is the purpose of these assurance escalation briefs?
Senator, I'll have to confirm that I understood that we were actually up to date with our FOIs.
No, the FOI's not behind. No.
Sorry,
I've got the answer. That's the answer is helping with the question. I just want to know what's the purpose of the assurance escalation briefs.
The DTA has a responsibility to provide advice to government and SROs on the performance of the digital portfolio. There are lots of compounding impacts across the portfolio that are not subject to just one particular project, that have implications across a broader array. Future investment decisions, release of additional funds from projects. So the advice that we provide to the Minister is about making sure that the Minister is aware of any potential impacts, not realised impacts, but potential impacts that may require additional escalations and sometimes discussions with her colleagues. We have an explicit need to bring information in early where there is the strongest possibility of remediation activities being applied.
So I think I have the one from February. That's the one
That's the annual major projects report,
Right.
I think, Senator.
Which Senator is not the...
Which is not the same thing.
Not the one. So the Shadow Minister submitted a question in writing through the reps. So it was number QIW 439, which I'm sure you know what that means, which sought specific information about projects under the oversight of the DTA. Now, the opposition has obtained under FOI documents which show how the DTA and relevant agencies responded to the initial request by Mr Fletcher. So what I want to know is, was the actioning of the release of the project data in February 2024 done before or after Mr Fletcher submitted his question in writing?
No idea.
From a timing perspective, Senator, it's been transparency and accountability has always been one of the issues that we've been looking at for the portfolio. There are significant sensitivities in releasing project performance data, especially if there are remediations that involve external parties. So we've gone to a reasonable amount of effort to ensure that the way that we release this data and the way that it's made public meets the objective of providing sunlight, in your words, Senator, to the performance of the digital portfolio.
Why should there be sensitivity?
If there's an issue with the performance of a vendor and there's legal or contractual remediation that's required, talking about it publicly could compromise that activity. There is also aspects of competitive, the privacy of commercial in confidence aspects that are coming through. There is also potentially issues around internal deliberation, so work that's happening within the department that has sensitivity. So there are significant factors.
But you'd have a dashboard, wouldn't you, in terms of all the projects that are under your remit at the moment?
So the DTA does several data collections where we look at the delivery confidence of existing portfolio functions. We've been doing a lot of work to make sure that that delivery confidence assessment has both a DTA view but also a self-reporting view from agencies, and we look at how those two things resolve out. We believe that delivery confidence assessment is a good indicator of the potential likelihood of achieving the project's outcomes, and as we get decreases in delivery confidence, we have an escalation protocol that we work with the senior responsible officers for to look at how the DTA supports the agencies in putting in remediations to get their projects back on track. It does not mean that the DTA steps in and does delivery functions in any of those projects.
In terms of the projects that are within your remit, you know, let's say major projects, you'll be able to provide an update as to the DCA of each of those projects, surely?
So, Senator, our plan is to produce the annual major projects report, as we did in February. Our intention is to repeat that process.
Well, I'm probably going to ask on notice very nicely.
Senator, can I just interrupt there? So when we look at different projects, there's different requirements. It's basically a fit-for-purpose assurance model. So the most strategically significant, which we call a Tier 1 project, would have quarterly independent delivery confidence assessments. A Tier 2, less risky, would have semi-annual delivery confidence assessments, and Tier 3 at best annual. So it's not necessarily a case that all agencies report delivery confidence assessments at the same time for each of the projects. So it's really tapered around the risk of that project and the tiering of it.
So bearing that in mind, I think, I would like to get, as of today's date or last week's date, a status update or DCA in relation to the major projects. I don't think it's are sufficient to wait for an annual report, for those reports to come out. Yeah.
There is a lot of work involved in it, for the reasons Mr Fechner said, and we have to work very closely with agencies for it. So we are actively working towards that project now, and so the steps we're going to take, the Christmas period and so forth, it will mean that you'll get a very live version, a very comprehensive version of that list.
I think that would be brilliant in terms of holding some of these other agencies to account in terms of where the projects are up to. So a live spreadsheet or whatever we call it, document would be perfect, actually.
So, Senator, I think the point Mr Poles was making is that real time, so as at a particular date, is not something that the DTA is currently able to provide, because there is different timings for the returns. So we have a major projects update once a year, and then we have a minor projects once a year. We're actually piloting work on trying to ingest reports from steering committees to help us with more real-time understanding, but that's still in pilot, that particular piece of work.
Okay. Well, I'd still like to get it, if that's possible.
We'll take it on notice about
thank
how we can provide. And can I just clarify, Senator, you're looking for the Tier 1 type projects or across all 3 tiers?
I'd like across all 3 tiers, actually. You shouldn't have asked me that. Sorry. Sorry.
Never ask a senator to narrow it
Yes. So, how big do you want the ice cream? Very big.
I will just tell you,
information you have.
the quantum will be in excess of 100.
That's fine.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
He's relaxed about you doing all that work.
Yeah, I'm very chilled. So I believe in sharing the workload, so I'm happy to help. I do have a lot of other questions, but I will need to put them on notice to assist the smooth running of the committee.
We appreciate your interest, Senator McGrath.
Right. Well, you know, it's one of my Don Quixote windmills.
Yeah.
So I'll hand over to... Well, I'm finished with the DTA, so you're released. Chair.
Thank you.
It's been a
The DTA is released, as is Senator Gallagher, who will be greatly relieved by that.
See you tomorrow.
You won't see us tomorrow.
No. 2 of you.
Not in here.
Yeah,
Perhaps in here.
We'll all come in, Declan, apart from you. Yeah.
Well, have a great day.
She will with us, won't you? Yeah, I will.
We'll suspend for just a moment, as long as it takes people to come to the table, noting that we're very keen to get underway. Secretary and other officers of the Department of Finance. Minister, do you have an opening statement?
Thank you for the opportunity to give one, Chair, but I'll decline on this occasion.
That was nearly long enough to be an opening statement in and of itself, Minister, but I won't take up any more time by saying so. Senator Hume.
Staffing table, Minister. Just for the benefit of the committee, is there anything, any material changes in there that you would like to make us aware of?
Amongst
in the staffing table? Is there anything of significance that you think the committee should be aware of?
Not that I can particularly
That's
think
fine.
of.
I'm not trying to be tricky. I'm just trying to save myself the read.
Yeah. No.
Yes.
No.
Okay.
No. It's a stock standard report that we release at this point in time on every estimates day.
Terrific. Thank you. I have some questions, first and foremost, about the machinery of government changes around the PWSS. I'm just after whether the department could provide an update on the progress of the MOG changes in relation to that, the changes, the functions of Department of Finance to PWSS and where that's up to.
Senator Andrew Jaggers, Deputy Secretary, Business Enabling Services. So the statutory PWSS was established on the 1st of October 23 within the portfolio. Finance staff were transferred to PWSS on the 26th of September 2024 under Section 72 of the Act, so 27 staff. The final transfer of appropriations from Finance to PWSS has happened in accordance with Section 75 of the PGPA Act now, and so that's now been finalised.
Okay. So how many staff have transferred and how many yet to transfer?
There are 27 staff, so all staff are now transferred.
Okay. And are there any other functions that are yet to move to the PWSS?
No, there's no further functions proposed. The MOG's finished from a Department of Finance perspective.
Okay. Does the department perform a role providing any form of ICT support or technical support to PWSS, particularly in integrating them to the systems that the Department of Finance operates?
Finance isn't providing the IT support for the PWSS.
It is?
We're not providing
not.
it. We may provide some support in relation to access to PEMS and information that might be required, but we don't provide their IT service.
Right. So PWSS does have access to PEMS?
It doesn't have access to PEMS, but it gets the information that it needs from PEMS through an arrangement that we have with PWSS.
Right. Okay. And does the PWSS have access to any of the payroll or employment systems that you use outside of PEMS?
I'll ask my colleagues to.
Yeah.
Amanda Bruce, Assistant Secretary, Business Enabling Services. So the PWSS has access either through an arrangement, as Mr Jaggers highlighted, or through reports, for example, that are run so that they've got access to the information that they need to undertake their functions. We also have an arrangement where some particular kinds of information, so for example, if they need to see what a parliamentarian can see on their electorate support workbench, for example, they phone into our payroll help desk and we can share that information with them on a case-by-case basis.
Right, so it's not direct access, it's filtered access according to their work needs.
That's correct, and we meet. I meet weekly with my counterpart in the PWSS, and so we have a forum where we can raise any issues that sort of aren't working.
Terrific. Okay. As of today, is the department providing any education or training to parliamentarians and their staff?
So, Senator Hume, from the 1st of October 2023, the education and sort of learning and development function transferred to the PWSS, as you'd be aware. I think it's fair to say that we work closely with the PWSS, with IPIA, and with others such as, say, the Department of Parliamentary Services or the Chamber departments to provide support as needed, and that sometimes has sort of an education or an
explanatory function, but we don't have a formal sort of function.
Program.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. I want to ask some questions about the resourcing review, so just make sure that I've got the right people at the table. The independent review of resourcing in parliamentarians' offices, which was scheduled to conclude by the end of October, has the government received that review, Minister?
Yeah, I think.
The independent resourcing review? Or anyone else at the table?
Senator Hume, so the resourcing review is being undertaken by the Parliamentary Workplace Support Service. From memory, the terms of reference indicate around October for that to be considered by the CEO. I think the questions on that would be best for the PWSS to provide an update on.
But the question was, has it been received by government? So can I just ask the Minister, have you received it? No?
No.
Okay, thank you. What is the government's timeline for responding to that review?
Like all of our responses, as quickly as we possibly can.
So is there an intention to respond to the review before the election, Minister?
Well, as I say, as quickly as we possibly can. If I knew the date of the election, I would be able to tell you. Unfortunately, I don't know the date of the election, and
so before May.
As soon as we possibly can respond, we will respond.
Okay. Is there a budget allocation for the response to the review?
Is there a
budget allocation to the response to the review?
Look, until we receive the review, we don't really know. Well, the short answer is no, because we don't, we don't know what's in it, and so until we know what's in it, we can't predict what the
budget allocation would
budget allocation might be.
So you are expecting that there would be a budget allocation for the response to the review in the next budget, in the upcoming budget?
Well, if the report requires a budget allocation, then obviously we would allocate that as soon as we possibly could.
I'd assume, and I assume that you will assume too, Minister, that a resourcing review isn't going to recommend cuts to resources. So,
well, I wasn't suggesting cuts.
No. So I would assume that then there might be a budget allocation for an increase.
But you're assuming, Senator, that we can predict what's in the report, and the short answer is we can't predict what is in the report. So until we receive the report, then we're not in a position to make any determination about what future budget implications that report might have. But can I say this? Obviously, that if there is a report, if it makes recommendations, we will obviously quickly and seriously review those recommendations, and we'll make a decision about how we respond to them.
Okay. I'm certain that those that prepared that report are listening in right now, and I will be asking them about that when they come into the room, so I might just prepare them for that question. I want to ask about PEMS implementation. I know we covered this off at most estimates, but I just have a couple of questions around specifically the ANAO report. When we were at last estimates, we spoke about the implementation of PEMS and the response to the Auditor-General's report on the implementation management of it. When we heard from the Auditor-General later in those hearings, he described the audit as very critical. I think the phrase he used was partly effective. That was the phrase that the report used. But when we asked for a definition of what that meant, he said it was pretty damning. And I'm not quoting him there. He did say, though, the report said finance does not have a process in place to track if the benefits of PEMS as presented in the business case have been achieved. The last time you said that the department had undertaken a benefits realisation review, but the report hadn't been completed. So I'm asking, has that process been completed now?
I'll ask Mr McKellar to answer your questions.
Thank you.
Alex McKellar, Assistant Secretary, Business Enabling Services. Senator, we're in the finalisation stages of that report, so no, it's not yet complete.
It's not complete? Okay. All right. I should ask, have there been any findings in that process, and while I know that the report is not complete, that you can share with the committee?
I would, sorry.
I was going to say, Senator, I think until the report's finished, it'd be a bit premature. It hasn't been finalised, but I think the ANAO had asked for it to be, or it suggests it should be done this year in 2024. We're on track to complete it.
Before the end of the calendar year?
Yes, that's our intention.
And is that a report that needs to have a response by government?
Well, once the report's finished, it'll be put to government, and that'll be a decision for them. Yeah.
Right, as to whether they respond or not?
Oh, well, it'll be put to government, but we'll provide information to the government about the outcomes of the benefits realisation report.
Okay. Minister, is it the government's intention to respond to that report?
Of course.
And is it the government's intention to respond to that report within this term of Parliament, if the report arrives before the end of the calendar year?
Well, again, since I don't know when the term of the government is going to, or the term of this election, or this Parliament is going to end, it's difficult to, answer that question. But, I mean, we're an action government, Senator, and we do things. And when we get reports, we respond to them, and we try and respond to them as quickly as we possibly can.
I think from memory, unless the Prime Minister is on his way to see the Governor-General right now, we're not having an election this year. So if we're not having an election this year, we can pretty much safely assume we're not having one till at least February next year. And if you receive the report before the end of the financial year, before the end of the calendar year, can we then ask, potentially, will the government be responding to this report in this term of government?
Well, I'm not sure your first assumption is correct. The minimum period for the calling of an election is 33 days, and as far as I can see, there's more than 33 days left in this calendar year. And
there are. Happy Christmas.
So I'm just making the comment. It's not fair to say that there can't be an election this year.
No, that's true. It could be on December 14th.
Yeah, it could be on December 14th. So, look, I have a feeling that the Prime Minister has already ruled out an election this year. I'd have to check that out, but I think that's what he said. And he's a man of his word. So that probably means it's not going to be this.
I'm sorry, I'm really not trying to be tricky. I just really want to understand these reports.
And nor am I, Senator. I'm trying to act. I mean, we respond to reports, and I like to think we respond to reports in a timely and professional way. That's what we will do with this report, and we will respond as quickly as we can. We're not in the business of delaying government. We do things, as you know, and we've done so many things.
I do.
In this term.
I do, Minister.
A surprisingly large number of things.
Yes. We might get on to the fact that we've only got an acting AEC Commissioner.
Well,
rather than actual AEC Commissioner for an election from a government that does things. We'll get onto that a little later.
But we simply used your procedure on the time that you appointed Mr. Rogers. That's all we've done. We've copied. You should be flattered. We've copied your template for the appointment of a commissioner in these circumstances.
Minister, but I don't remember a coalition government ever having an acting commissioner for an election. We always had a permanent commissioner in place, and that was because we knew when their term was going to end, as we knew when Mr. Rogers was going to end a considerable period of time ago.
I'll get this checked out, Senator Hume, but my understanding is we have followed precisely the template that, when you were in government, that you applied to the appointment of Mr. Rogers.
I'm sure we'll get onto the AEC soon.
I don't want to I don't want to anticipate your questions, but...
No. I wanted to ask some questions, please, about changes to the Department of the Senate payroll. Obviously, since the last estimates, there's been a response to several questions on notice in relation to the decision that the government took to increase the resourcing of the Department of the Senate to accommodate the movement of parliamentarians' pay from monthly to fortnightly. Question on notice number 6 outlined the fact that the decision to allocate 2 ASL to the Department of the Senate was done on the basis of, and I'm quoting here, informal conversations between the Office of the Special Minister of State and the offices of presiding officers. Is there a record that the department holds that shows the business case for allocating 2 ASL to the Department of the Senate?
Who are you are directing your...
Anyone that can answer the question if there's a business case that shows that 2 ASL were needed for the Department of the Senate in order to implement changes to payroll. Permanent ASL.
Senator Nathan Williamson, Deputy Secretary for Finance. I'll take that on notice. I'm sorry, I don't have that material with me. If it had been earlier in the day, because that's something we would have covered in outcome 1.
Yep.
So I'll take that question on notice.
Okay. Is the department aware that this means that there's now a total of 6 staff that are administering the payroll of 76 senators, and it's an additional $280,000 a year in salaries for those 2 extra public servants?
So I'll take that on notice. My recollection, Senator, is that there was a proposal put forward requesting additional staff, recognising the change in the payment arrangements was going to require both initially, I think it was ICT changes and then ongoing additional administration. I recall, but I stand to be corrected, that there was additional resourcing in the first year and that resourcing dropped off, but there was still ongoing resourcing for that. But I can't recall anything more than that, so I'd have to take the rest of the notice for you.
So the clerk did tell us that he didn't think that they would need 2 permanent staff on an ongoing basis. And when I asked him is that what the Department of Finance and the government have approved, he said yes, we were asked to bring forward the NPP by Finance or Special Minister of State in order to implement this. And I asked him if he was, as the head of the department, he didn't think 2 ongoing staff would be necessary, but government have approved 2 ongoing staff for the positions anyway. And he said, I suppose that's a fair assessment of it. And the question was, that doesn't sound like Finance did much scrutiny. And the clerk said no.
So I disagree with that. Again, I'm going off my best recollection.
Yep.
I have no papers here and I don't have the relevant staff. Finance didn't say that you have to bring forward a proposal. My understanding is that Finance's advice was that if additional resourcing was required, that a proposal needed to come forward. The proposal, from recollection, came from the President of the Senate. So it doesn't come from the clerk.
Right.
And so we, like any proposal that comes forward, would have scrutinised it in that manner.
The clerk said that he was asked to provide, we were asked to bring forward the NPP by Finance or SMOS in order to implement this.
So I think there's just a slightly different view about it wasn't Finance saying you have to bring forward an NPP. It was Finance saying if you require additional resources, the appropriate way to ask government to consider those additional resources is to bring forward a proposal. And, of course, like any agency, we assist agencies when they are putting forward proposals for government consideration.
Okay. So this is completely contradictory to the Clerk of the Senate's testimony. They said, the clerk said, that the department did not ask for the staff, but that the Special Minister of State or the Department of Finance asked if they would like to be provided staff to make the change. The clerk said he didn't think that they were needed. So that's...
All I can
Completely different.
I'm trying to be helpful.
Yeah, I know.
I will therefore take it on notice. I'm giving you my best recollection of what occurred at the time, but I think it's... I don't believe Finance said you have to bring forward a proposal. Finance would scrutinise all proposals in the usual way. However, if there are additional resources that have been allocated that are not required, we can always look to remedy that.
Okay, so there must be somewhere, whether it be in the Office of the Special Minister of State, whether it be in the Department of Finance, somewhere there must be a record of the decision to add 2 additional staff to the Department of the Senate to implement changes to payroll. So I'm asking now if, on notice, that evidence, whether it be a business case, whether it be an MPP, whatever it might be, is identified and can be given to this committee.
So I will take that question on notice. It would have formed, like anything in that space, will form part of government consideration of the budget. So I'll take it on notice and see what can be provided to the committee.
Okay. And Minister, if it's coming out of the Special Minister of State's office, is that something that you can also provide? Because we've lost the business case. No one knows how these 2 additional staff came to be.
To be honest with you, Senator, the change that was being proposed, I would have thought it self-evidently required additional staff because you're more frequently doing the pays. But I'll follow it up and see what information I can provide to you.
We did canvass this at the last estimates and we agreed that potentially the implementation would require additional staff. That's not what the Clerk of the Senate said. He said that he didn't need them. He was offered them and he said, well, I'll take them temporarily, and then he got them permanently. So that just doesn't... There's something gone awry there, and I think we want to uncover it.
I'm happy to follow that up and see what's occurred there.
Okay. I'd like to ask some questions...
It shouldn't take 4 full-time staff to do the payroll of 76 people.
6 full-time staff. 6 full-time staff to do the payroll of 76 people. I want to ask some questions, please, about the Members of Parliament Staff Act Enterprise Agreement and the implementation of that. I just want an update on the progress of the Enterprise Agreement for parliamentary staff. I know that it's now been approved by the Fair Work Commission. Yes? Who am I asking?
With an 83% approval rating.
Yes, and the Fair Work Commission approved it. I don't think they needed 83%. It was just the Fair Work Commission, yeah? So, I'm sorry. I'm not entirely sure who I'm asking this question of.
Senator, you just want an update?
I'd like an update on the progress of the Enterprise Agreement.
Yes.
I've asked, it has been approved by Fair Work.
It has been approved by Fair Work and it commences on the 5th of November.
5th of November. Sorry, it was approved on what date?
I'll just get Ms Bruce to answer that question.
Thank you, Senator Hume. It was approved by Fair Work on the 29th of October.
29th of October. When was it first submitted?
It was submitted on the 30th of August.
30th of August, right.
And if I could add, as is normal with enterprise agreements, Fair Work requested some additional information from the department that was provided by the department on the 27th of September, and I understand that as part of that process, other parties to the agreement, such as unions, are also able to make a submission during that process.
Okay. Sorry, and what date did the department receive the request from Fair Work?
I think I have that in my folder, if you'll just give me a minute. I don't want to waste your time, Senator.
That's
I'm
okay.
happy to just see if I can find that and come back to later during the session, if that helps.
Yeah, that would be terrific. Thank you. So the 1st of November is when staff receive the benefits of the new agreement, which is a couple of days ago. 1st of November?
No, sorry, Senator. Today, the 5th of November is when the terms and conditions come into effect.
Yes.
That's with the exception of salary and salary-based allowances,
right,
which are backdated in effect to the 5th of August.
Right.
And so all other terms and conditions don't start until today, if that makes sense.
Yep. So there was some difficulty in the department's ability to provide payments to staff in an accurate and timely manner. For instance, following the last election. I'm wondering if the department can give a guarantee that the timeliness of the payment of any back pay or similar payments to staff will be made before the end of the year.
So perhaps I can talk you through the key dates that are planned for those payments to staff, if I may. So we communicated to all staff, and this information would have also been sent to all parliamentarians as part of our sort of regular mail-out process last Friday. So increases in rates for salary and allowances are expected to be paid on the 21st of November. Retention payments for eligible staff are expected to be paid on the 5th of December. And then for eligible employees who've ceased MOPS Act employment or have had one or more breaks in service since the 5th of August, they'll be paid their adjustments for final monies or previous periods of employment on the 19th of December. And so what that means is for some employees, they may receive 2 payments. Right. They may receive for their current contract on the 21st of November the increase, and then if they've had a break in service, they may then receive a second payment, if that makes sense.
Okay. Thank you. How prepared is the department to implement the changes that are outlined in the agreement? For instance, the agreement proposes a same-day travel allowance. Could you explain to the committee what that is?
Yes. So the same-day travel allowance is a new allowance which would enable a MOPS Act employee to travel to their destination when approved by their employing parliamentarian and return home on the same day. We're currently working through with the Independent Parliamentary Expenses Authority what some of the policy settings for that will look like, and it's one of the new entitlements in the EA which it will not be available from today, if that makes sense. So we're working towards having that available within the first 12 months of the EA, as was communicated during the bargaining process.
Okay. But the intention is it's going to be provided through the same arrangements as normal travel allowance?
That's right, Senator. So the discussions that we've had with both our colleagues at IPIA and also our colleagues within Ministerial and Parliamentary Services who look after PEMS is about ensuring that, I suppose, the user experience for staff and for parliamentarians or authorised officers who would have to approve that's consistent with existing travel allowance arrangements, if that makes sense, kind of from a user perspective.
Okay. For electorate officers that aren't the nominated traveller, is the cost of the same-day travel allowance intended to be deducted from the electorate office budget that provides for travel?
Senator, that is one of the things that we're looking at settling. I think it is intended that it would be debited from a parliamentarian's electorate support budget.
Right, so the electorate support budget's now covering lunches for same-day travel or snacks. That's kind of what it's for, isn't it?
Well, the electorate support budget has 2 components. It has a relief staff component and it has a travel component. I would note that the electorate support budget will be adjusted automatically for parliamentarians, given that the staffing component is based on, I think it's 150 days of the electorate officer B rate, with salary allowance, with salaries increasing from today from 4%. That change will flow through to the electorate support budgets that parliamentarians have.
Can I ask if the department's got any legal advice on how to classify this kind of entitlement, or if it feels it needs legal advice?
Are you able to?
Well, I don't know. This is new, so including a same-day travel allowance as part of the electorate office budget. That's a kind of a new allocation.
In terms of it being debited from the budget. So we haven't had legal advice specifically with respect to that.
Okay. Can I ask, as a senator, I'm sure everybody around the table has had this experience. We don't just necessarily travel interstate. Sometimes we travel within our state. If I go to Ballarat, I might go for 2 days. Sometimes I might stay overnight. Other times I'll drive home, even though it's a very long drive. If somebody drives with me and we just go for a day, are they entitled to a travel allowance, same-day travel allowance?
So they're the questions that we're working through with IPIA in terms of, I suppose, what the thresholds would have to be for the travel allowance to be enlivened. So I think it's fair enough to say that if you're commuting from, say, Queanbeyan to APH for a day, it's not intended to support that. It's intended to support more family-friendly travel arrangements where people may wish to be home, for example, of an evening, so that they're sort of home of an evening or in the morning. And we are working through those questions with IPIA.
Okay, I'm a little concerned about this one just because we are so conscious now of making mistakes and what the implications of making mistakes, particularly with something like travel allowance, might be, and who that cost for making a mistake might fall to. This is a new travel allowance and it is very murky. Doesn't feel like it hasn't necessarily been thought through. So perhaps by the next Senate estimates, it might be something that you could walk through a little bit more with the committee. If it isn't being implemented for another 12 months, there should be some time for that. But I do feel that this is one of the parts of the new agreement that is a little opaque.
Certainly, Senator. And if I may add, it's intended that the allowance would be supported by a guideline.
So there'll be guidance.
And one of the things I would say is that it's always been our intention with any new allowance to ensure that they're reviewed appropriately to ensure that they're working as intended, that there's no unintended consequences. And so I think we would make that commitment with this, that if after 12 months, sort of 12 months into the operation of a new allowance, we would be looking at that with IPIA to ensure that it's operating as intended and that there's no sort of unintended consequences, such as an impact on the budget, for example.
So you can guarantee, though, that there will be some guidance put out before this comes into effect?
Yes.
Right, thank you.
I was just going to add, Senator, Sally Bectus, Acting First Assistant Secretary. In addition to the guidance, we will be doing quite a bit of communications around this. As Ms Bruce mentioned earlier, that communication will go to staff as well as parliamentarians, and we are looking at various experiences. And as mentioned earlier, a lot of this has come about through extensive consultation, and there has been a lot of thinking through the process. We're just working through the implementation and how that will come together.
Great. Thank you. I've got some questions about the Government Staffing Committee that are probably best directed, I think, to the Minister. In previous hearings, Minister, you've provided us confirmation that the government had a staffing committee. You've confirmed its membership. I just want to confirm that the membership of the committee hasn't changed, that the membership, and just as a sort of as a refresher, the membership of that committee includes the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister for Finance, you as the Special Minister of State, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, the Chief of Staff to the Leader of the Government in the Senate, and Chief of Staff to you, to the Special Minister of State. Is that about right?
Yes, those last two that you mentioned they attend and participate. They're not actually technically
voting members, if you like.
So yes. The four that you first mentioned, the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr Gartrell, Minister Gallagher and myself are the four voting
Right. Okay. And that hasn't changed?
Correct.
Terrific. Could I confirm that the body still performs the role linked to the statement of standards for ministerial staff?
The behaviour codes set out expectations for behaviour that include requirements to foster respectful and inclusive workplaces, a prohibition on bullying, harassment, sexual assault, and discrimination in all its forms.
Okay. Minister, at previous estimates I've asked how the statement of standards for ministerial staff applies to government staff, and I've asked if the management of these standards would transfer to the PWSS for management. You've provided answers in the past that it won't. Could I ask if the standards will be enforced by the new IPSC?
The IPSC?
Yeah.
I would have to have a look at that, Senator, and come back to you.
Could you perhaps tell me if you've put your mind around how the IPSC will interact with the Government Staffing Committee?
I think they would simply act independently of one another, Senator. I don't see that there's a... I mean, the Government Staffing Committee simply makes decisions about the employment of staff for essentially ministers. I don't see that... I don't see that has a interaction.
Well,
I'm just not sure what the connection you're thinking that
well, the
there
IPSC
is.
obviously overlooks is the oversight body for standards of conduct and codes of conduct, and you said that the body that the Government Staff Committee still performs the role linked to the Statement of Standards for Ministerial Staff. That Statement of Standards for Ministerial Staff, you've said, is not going to transfer to the PWSS. So is it going to have some form of interaction with the IPSC as the overarching body for codes of conduct?
I'll come back to you on it, but I think the answer to that is no. I mean, these are just not... I must admit I can't quite see the connection between the two, but perhaps I'm missing... Perhaps I'm missing something here, but...
if there are breaches of standards, there is potentially a situation where both committees, both bodies, the IPSC and the Government Staffing Committee, might have to seek to deal with an issue, and I'm just not entirely sure what happens in that instance.
Okay, let me give that some thought,
Yeah.
Senator. I'll come back.
I know
to
it's new, so it is something new that we probably all have to put our minds around in government and in opposition.
Off the top of my head, I don't see the link between the two of them, but let me give it some thought and I'll come back to you.
Okay. I have some follow-up on questions on notice. The question on notice number 1 from the 23-24 additional estimates hearing. The department undertook to update us on the provision of the external audit report on legal assurance, fraud and risk. At the time, the department had informed the ANAO on the 18th of December 2023 as part of the rather damning audit into the department's management of PEMS that you would have that external audit report by the middle of February. On notice, you responded that this has slipped to the end of February and then to early April. I'm wondering what the cause of the delay is.
So, Senator, you're referring to the PEMS assessment of conformance with statutory requirements report?
Yes, the provision of the external audit report on legal assurance, fraud and risk.
Yeah, so the report's been completed and we provided a copy of it to the Secretariat, to this committee, late last week.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Sorry, that was cutting it fine and I haven't seen it since. So, but thank you very much for that.
It was quite late last week, so...
Okay. Who conducted the audit?
The audit was conducted by EY.
By Ernst & Young?
Yes.
Has Ernst & Young been provided with the contract extension for the longer time frame?
I'll ask Mr McKellar to talk to the contracting arrangements.
Yes, Senator, they were.
They were. Terrific. And what's the current value of the contract with EY?
Did you want Senator, the overall value or the money that was spent in the end?
Both.
Okay, the overall value of the contract was around $401,000, but the final amount paid was $362,000.
$362,000, thank you. And obviously you've got a copy of the audit, and that has now been given to this committee, and I just need to go hunting for it somewhere. Thank you. What did the audit report find, just to save me if you can give me the Reader's Digest version?
Yeah, Senator, the report sort of dealt with an evaluation of compliance against 407 different statutory requirements, which is sort of why the report took a bit longer than we had initially expected. The conformance report indicated an achievement of 99.75% compliance.
So could you say that number again?
Yeah, 99.75% compliance.
99.75%?
Through a combination of the automated systems and the manual processes that support those systems.
Okay.
So they're the key highlights, Senator.
All right. I look forward to the lowlights. I'll read that report with interest. That's all the questions I had for the department, unless anyone else has questions. Senator Birmingham, I thought you might. Yeah.
Thanks.
You have the call, Senator Birmingham.
Excellent. Thanks, Chair. I'll try to be as quick as I can. What is the status of decisions around any additional personal staff employees for Senator Payman?
So was that a question to me?
It was a question to anybody who feels like they'd like to answer, but there was deafening silence from all of the seats around you, Senator Farrell.
So would you like to repeat the question?
I can.
Senator?
I was asking what the status of any decisions around provision of additional personal staff were for Senator Payman.
Well, those decisions, of course, are made by the Prime Minister. To my knowledge, a request was made by Senator Payman and at least one other senator for additional staff. And again, to the best of my knowledge, the Prime Minister is considering that application.
Page 7 of the table provides the list of additional personal staff provided to minority parties and independents. Page 7 of 9. By my reckoning, every other minor party or independent senator is provided with additional staff.
No, I don't believe that's correct, Senator.
Who's missing?
No, I think you're right. Yep.
I think I am right.
Yep. No, I think
indeed,
you're right.
including most notably Senator Thorpe and Senator Van, neither of whom were elected as independents and both of whom have left other political parties during the life of this Parliament.
Yep.
How soon after leaving their respective political parties were Senator Thorpe and Senator Van provided with additional staff?
Oh, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you, but I can find that out for you, Senator.
If we could take that on notice. And those two were approved by the Prime Minister for additional staff?
Yes, correct.
Okay, perhaps on notice, if we can understand how and when a request was made, if it was made, or if indeed...
Sorry, Senator. I am correct in saying that Senator Payman is not the only person who hasn't received it. It's Senator Rennick is not on the list. So
Senator Rennick. Okay.
Yes. So there are two...
Fair point. He is an even more recent departee from one of the parties.
Yes, correct.
Are you aware as to whether Senator Rennick has made a request?
I'm almost certain he has, Senator.
Right. So they are both awaiting decision.
Correct.
Okay.
So I think, just trying to work out the sequence here, I think the only two that haven't received additional staffing are the last two to leave their political parties and form something else.
It's terrible business. I'd note actually that when I sat partly in your shoes, I think Mr. Kelly left the Liberal Party during that time, and the position Mr. Morrison and I took at the time was if you left a political party mid-term, you could sweat it out until the next election and see whether you got re-elected or not before you got additional staff. But seeing as you've set the precedent with Senators Thorpe and Van, then there's an equity equation to be considered for any others.
The only precedent is that, you know, they made an application and the Prime Minister considered it and he awarded that. Subsequent applications have been made and no determination has yet been made by the Prime Minister on those.
If on notice I could understand, please, when and how applications were made by Senators Thorpe and Van, when and how they were approved by the Prime Minister, and when and how they were communicated to those senators, and so far as those approaches or issues are applicable to Senators Payman and Rennick, the same, please.
Yeah. Just on that penultimate question, I think it would have been me who would have, or my office would have been the person to communicate the decisions of the Prime Minister.
Sure.
So I can answer that one.
Let's get the when and how details in any event, please. Thank you. The other issue I want to touch on while this part of the department's here relates to special purpose aircraft. After a very long process, new guidelines were published in the midst of the last estimates on the 7th of June for the use of special purpose aircraft. Does the department or any minister in the department play any ongoing role in relation to how SPAs are used or how their use is reported on?
No, Senator, we don't.
Okay, none at all. Thanks, Mr. Jaggers. Does the department receive any copy of data relating to the use of SPAs?
I don't believe we do.
No.
It's a matter for defence and I think IPIA as well.
Okay, so Defence does not share with you in advance the quarterly reports of SPA use before they're publicly reported?
No, they don't.
No, they don't?
No, they don't.
You'd be forgiven for saying you're not sure because, in fact, they haven't undertaken a quarterly report since publishing the guidelines on the 7th of June. So I'd have been most interested if they had shared one with you. Thank you. During the process for reviewing the guidelines, Finance was part of the working group to review the guidelines. That's correct, yes?
That's correct.
Yes, Senator.
Nodding there. And indeed in Mr Miles's letter to Senator Farrell, the DPM asked for the departments to work together to balance the needs of the security review with the need for transparency and accountability. Is the department satisfied that those needs around transparency and accountability were achieved in the new SPA guidelines?
So, Senator, we provided input into the process and provided assistance in settling the guidelines. So,
provided input and assistance. Were your recommendations accepted as part of the guidelines?
Our role, as Mr Jaggers has outlined, was really to coordinate the process and establish the working group with our other key agencies. With regard to any information with regard to transparency, etc., we rely on the advice of agencies, law enforcement agencies that are professionals in that area, and their input was what was considered. We obviously worked through the guidelines and ensured that it was aligned to the PBR framework, which is the overarching framework in which the SPA guidelines sit under, but in terms of any specific recommendations around transparency of data, etc., that's more a matter of defence and Home Affairs who have worked with that
Actually, Ms
information.
Bectas, with respect, that's quite a misinterpretation of what your role should have been, and a concern if that's the way you approached your role. That indeed the law enforcement agencies were there to provide the advice in relation to security considerations and the personal protection of ministers' information and details. The whole point of establishing the working group and including others, particularly in terms of the Deputy Prime Minister's references to transparency and accountability, was to ensure there was some balancing of that. And finance, with IPIA as part of the portfolio cluster, is well and truly the custodian of the transparency and accountability around the reporting of parliamentarians' expenditure and information. So I hope that there's some correction from the statement you've just made, and the role finance did play in the working group was to ensure that it wasn't just based on the security advice everything should be kept secret, but actually you were the custodians of transparency and accountability.
Senator, I think Ms Bectas is referring to the role that a range of people played, but we're talking about two sides of a coin here. The level of transparency that can be provided relates to the security agency's advice on what transparency can be provided. In terms of the security requirements of those agencies have.
It's contestable, and it requires actually some assessment.
Yeah, so I think that the role that finance played was to work through with those agencies, as Ms Bectas has described it, a solution that everyone was happy with, that met both of those sets of obligations. But we're happy that the guidelines were settled. We're happy with the way that the process ran, and we're able to play a small role in that process.
Are you concerned if Defence has not yet released a quarterly report?
What's the matter for Defence, Senator?
And doesn't even the transparency and accountability that was achieved doesn't appear to be being met? Okay. Is Finance aware of the FOI that was released in the last week relating to some of the manifests of aircraft use?
I'm not personally aware of it, Senator. Maybe the team will.
I received a copy as an FYI yesterday, Senator.
Okay, that's the only contact there's been?
Correct.
Not aware as to whether that release of FOI information might preempt a review of the guidelines as they've been drafted? Not much point to the official reports withholding information that then people are just going to extract by FOI anyway.
Senator, we'll have to take that on notice. I don't think we're all familiar with the FOI outcome and whether there's any implications for guidelines.
Okay. Thanks, Mr Jaggers.
Senator, if I could just add, as we were working through the guidelines, we did agree that there was a need for regular reviews prescribed, and it is prescribed in the SPA guidelines, and this is actually new. We did deliberate around the transparency, etc., and as Mr Jaggers outlined at the time what was considered, where we landed, we agreed that we would have reviews established in the guidelines to come back and have a look at that, and the reviews are very much around the balance of transparency and security settings, and this was actually new into the guidelines as a result of that discussion. I just thought it might help to add that.
Okay. Thanks, Ms Bectas, and there may be a need to initiate those review proceedings sooner than perhaps was envisaged after those FOI releases. Thank you.
Senator Hume.
I'm done with the Department Chair. I'm happy to move on to the AUC.
Thank you. Thank you for your attendance today. It's greatly appreciated, especially officers from the Department of Finance. We'll now move on to the Australian Electoral Commission. Thank you, Mr Pope. We welcome you as Acting Electoral Commissioner and other officers of the AEC. Do you have an opening statement this evening?
Thank you, Chair. Look, no opening statement, but if you don't mind, I'll just make a couple of remarks and firstly apologise on behalf of the Electoral Commissioner for not making estimates tonight. It's the first time in 11 years that he's missed estimates and he sincerely apologises, but the timing was driven by some personal factors whilst he's taking some well-deserved leave. And I think, given that he's due to finish his term in the middle of December, it would be appropriate for me to at least take this opportunity at his last estimates just to briefly acknowledge his outstanding contribution to not just the Australian Electoral Commission but also to electoral integrity, both in Australia and nationally and globally. His influence over the last 11 years as Electoral Commissioner, I think, has been nothing short of outstanding. I might just leave it at that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I certainly endorse those remarks on behalf of all senators in this place.
And I do so on behalf of the government, and I'm hoping to take...
Minister, please convey those thoughts to the Commissioner when he departs from all of us.
I'm taking him out to dinner in a couple of weeks' time just to officially thank him for him and his wife for their great contribution to democracy in this country.
Thank you. We'll now move to questions. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Chair. And I suppose I might be stealing Senator Birmingham's thunder, but if we too could reiterate our thanks for Mr Rogers' service, which I know we'd mentioned at the last Senate estimates, but yes, we would also like to reinforce your comments, Mr Pope, but also congratulate you on your appointment as Acting Commissioner. I do want to ask a couple of questions about the fact that we have an Acting Commissioner for the upcoming election, but I want to make sure that when I do so, that there is no inference, no reflection on you personally, because we think that you are highly qualified for the role. But I am interested in knowing when the Commission first informed the government that the Commissioner wouldn't be seeking an extension of his term.
Senator, in terms of official notification to the government, I think I'm going to have to take that on notice, but it was officially, I think, done more recently than not.
Minister, do you know when officially Mr Rogers informed the government that he wouldn't be seeking a reappointment or extension?
I can't think of that date off the top of my head, but I will find out for you, Senator. And
from memory, it was a considerable period of time ago, potentially at least early in 2024 was when I became aware that Mr Rogers wasn't going to be continuing on in the role. I would assume that an informal conversation is enough for you to start turning your mind to how we might replace somebody of Mr Rogers' calibre.
Again, I'd have to check what date I was advised.
Okay. Can you remind me, Minister, or indeed Mr Pope, when the last time there was an electoral event when we had an acting commissioner?
I can give you that. My understanding, and this was a point I was trying to make earlier, Senator, we have followed the practice of the former government in appointing a acting commissioner. My understanding is you did that, or your former government did that, on December 13th of December 13th, 2013, and then there was, you may recall, Senator Pratt would certainly recall this event, a Western Australian Senate election on April of 2014, and then the permanent appointment of Mr Rogers as the substantive commissioner was made in December 14. So, as I said, we've simply followed the practice of recent appointments in appointing an acting commissioner. Having said that, can I reiterate your comments in the faith that we have in Mr Pope to conduct the next election in the most professional way possible?
No missing ballot papers.
Can I do acknowledge that may be the case, that was very unusual circumstances, Minister. It wasn't a BAU appointment back then, whereas this is a business as usual appointment. I just want to understand whether other arrangements have been settled with the AEC. So I suppose the flow-on appointments, is there an acting deputy commissioner and other flow-on appointments that have now occurred within the AEC?
Senator, we're in the process of addressing that. So my appointment as acting commissioner takes effect, I think, on the 15th of December.
Right.
So we currently have an expression of interest process internally to look for an acting deputy electoral commissioner.
Okay. And is there any other flow-on appointments potentially after that?
Potentially. There could well be some consequential acting arrangements, yes.
Okay. Is there a new structure or organisational chart that can be tabled at this point in time?
There's been no changes made yet, Senator. We can table one when those changes take effect.
Could I ask on notice whether a new organisational chart could be provided to the committee after the 15th of December or when additional changes are made to the organisational chart?
Yes.
Thank you. Terrific. All right. We are obviously now in the pre-election period, the official pre-election period as far as the AEC is concerned. Is that correct?
Absolutely, Senator. We've been in election readiness period for quite some time.
Excellent. What steps have you taken to prepare for the election?
Well, Senator, many. So we have an election readiness roadmap process which, because of the unknown date of the election, means that we need to be ready at the earliest possible moment. So we have gone through our stages of readiness and we have been ready to deliver a federal election now for the last couple of months. Since late September was our latest directed level of election readiness. So we are now ready and raring to go at any particular point.
So can I just confirm locations you've identified?
So we've worked very hard on identifying polling places, early voting centres to the extent we possibly can when you don't know an actual date. But we have started that process.
And materials?
We have got materials in place, absolutely. We've run a rehearsal on ballot paper printing to make sure that that process runs as smoothly as we possibly can.
And how do you go about hiring staff when you don't know the date?
And we have started the process of hiring staff. We have about 130,000 temporary election workers in our new system, which we're using for this election. We've actually just started advertising more for temporary election workers, particularly in regional and remote parts of Australia where we struggle sometimes to recruit people. So we've started that process now. So the staffing process is well and truly underway. It is difficult, obviously, without a date. We will re-engage with those staff when the announcement is made. The election training is locked and loaded, ready to go. Materials are locked and loaded. Our outposted centres are pretty well locked and loaded. So our systems have all been tested. We've conducted a number of rehearsals. We are ready to go, Senator.
Right. Terrific. You touched on my next question, which was what work has been done since the last election to prepare for the engagement with Indigenous communities and also remote Australia, you mentioned.
Yes. So firstly, if I can deal with Indigenous communities, which is incredibly important. I mean, we continue to work very hard on adding more Indigenous Australians to the electoral roll. And you might have seen in the middle of the year we published our estimated Indigenous enrolment rate, and whilst that dropped by 1.2%, we actually added an extra 75,000 Indigenous electors to the roll, which just gives you an indication of the rate of population growth that is occurring within Indigenous communities around Australia. So we are, we're in a position where we're confident that more Indigenous electors are on the roll and eligible to vote for this election than any other election in our history. We have completed our advertising, our education offering. We are increasing our partnerships with Indigenous community organisations, and we are out and about engaging right across the country to run awareness sessions, education sessions, and also to try and recruit Indigenous people to come and work for us at the election. So that's a very, very big area of focus for us right now, and will continue to be right up to and during the election period. And as I said, we've started our advertising campaign for temporary election workers in regional and remote parts of Australia to try and increase the numbers of staff who are available to work in polling places in those parts of the country.
Terrific. I wanted to ask about divisional offices, whether you've moved or closed any divisional offices recently.
We have had a couple of closures, Senator. I think, and I'll stand to be corrected, but I think we're probably around about half a dozen in the most sort of in the last, well, probably this calendar year. We have 74 business as usual properties, as we refer to them, rather than our outposted centres. They have come about as a consequence of a number of factors, generally expiring leases, sometimes not being able to find a premises that's suitable in the property market because it's incredibly tight. Sometimes not being able to find a property that is value for money in the property market. And we find great efficiencies in co-locating our divisional offices, particularly where they've previously been what we call a standalone office with 2.5 FTE in those offices. So we look for those opportunities to try and co-locate where we can.
Co-locate with whom?
With another divisional office in the vicinity.
Right, okay.
So most of this is occurring in metro areas or in large regional centres such as Newcastle, for instance.
Right. When this happens, when a divisional office is closed or moved, do you communicate that change to the community in any way? Do you communicate it to the local federal member? Is there a process by which?
We do have a process. We write to the relevant member advising them of the closure. Generally have signs in our offices for quite some period of time. We have advice on our website about where you can locate our offices for respective divisions. Many of those offices don't have a lot of foot traffic that come in them, which is also one of the driving business reasons for the amalgamation.
Yeah, fair enough. Just for the sake of clarity, and maybe to put the Minister's and my mind at rest, could you tell us what the last practicable date for an election to be held for the AEC to be able to provide the writs back to the Governor-General?
Well, Minister, your last reference there is incredibly important, particularly when it comes to the Senate, because as you know, the Senate must reform. The Senate must reform for the new financial year. So the last practical date would be the 17th of May, in our view, for a half Senate and House of Representatives election, for that very reason.
Very good. In the first election in which I was elected in 2016, it was the first time we used the electronic voting, or electronic counting, I should say, for ballot papers for the Senate, and it took a month to sort of log it all and then press go on the final day and have it all calculated. My understanding is that time frame has been shrinking over elections, that now it's become more an efficient process. There's been learnings from each election which mean that it can be done far faster. Do we know how long officially it is intended, it's expected to take to count the ballot papers?
Well, Senator, as you'd appreciate, there's lots of variables.
Yes.
One of those, of course, is an increase to the electoral roll, so therefore an increase in electors.
Yeah.
And I think at the moment we're looking at a potential increase of around 653 electors from the 2022 election.
So 653,000.
Yes. I should say.
Okay,
653,000 electors since the last election. So,
Sorry, can I explain? So, at this point, if the election was today, there's 653,003 new voters on the roll
from the 2022 federal election. So that's obviously a big factor. You're correct. We have been learning, refining, and getting better at the process. But I think we're still in the vicinity of 23 to 24 days, particularly for the larger states of Victoria.
Total days, working days?
4 weeks. 4 weeks. It's a 4-week period.
4 weeks.
And working days. And we tend to work pretty much every day during that period. It's a massive, massive undertaking and highly complex. But 4 weeks to be safe, and then we would always like to have an extra few days, Senator, just in case there are some sort of interruptions from a logistical perspective or from a systems perspective, or sometimes, scrutinies can also impact on the process from time to time as well, which they're entitled to do, of course.
Okay.
Do you want to I might just ask.
Sorry, Senator. Kath Gleeson, Acting Deputy Commissioner. It's worth mentioning too that it's not just the counting. Before we can return the writs, we need to go through data capture, reconciliation, and then the process to have the writs returned and signed off and preferences distributed. So that's in addition to the counting itself, which is why the 4 weeks is so crucial.
Okay, terrific. Thank you for that. I have some questions around referendum auditing. So how many referendum disclosure returns were submitted to the AEC?
If my memory is correct, Senator, 88.
88?
From referendum entities.
From referendum entities, thank you. Could you confirm that on notice, if it's any different?
I'm correct, Senator.
Okay. I trust you. Do you have a breakdown of the number of entities campaigning for yes versus the number of entities that were campaigning for no?
I don't know that we've actually captured that data, but I'm happy to ask our resident expert. No, we haven't actually done that analysis or captured that data.
Has the AEC commenced any referendum disclosure reviews?
Yes, we have.
You have?
Yes.
And how many reviews will the AEC be undertaking on the referendum returns?
50.
50, okay. How have those 50 been selected?
Look, similar to the way in which we'd select compliance reviews for elections and outside of elections. We have a risk matrix in which we adopt and we objectively run the data through that matrix process, and it's oversighted by a committee, and the referendum entities pop out the other end as the ones that we feel are probably best placed for a compliance review.
Okay. So what happens if, obviously for the referendum there would have been a number of entities that have no need to exist anymore, that they specifically formed for the referendum and now don't exist. So what happens if they've since concluded operations?
We still intend to conduct the compliance reviews in those circumstances, Senator. So we'll be engaging with the registered officer or the financial controller of that entity that was nominated at the time of the referendum, and we'll be working with them to conduct the compliance review.
Okay. Is the list of 50 organisations that are entities that are currently subject to a referendum disclosure review public?
No, but when the compliance reviews are completed, they'll be on our website for everybody to access.
Can that list be provided to this committee?
I don't think it's something that we've ordinarily done before, Senator. I think it's a process that we've generally undertaken, and we've published the outcomes rather than providing public or advance notice of a compliance review to be undertaken.
Is the notice that you provide them a Section 109N notice? Is that officially the title of what it is that you issue to these organisations?
I'm getting advice that that is correct.
Yes. So can you provide a list of entities issued with a Section 109N notice?
Retrospective. The ones that we've done retrospectively, yes, I can.
For the referendum?
Yes.
Okay, I would like that on notice, please. Okay. I want to have an understanding of the potential changes to the electoral system that have been mooted. Acting Commissioner, following the final report into the last election, which was conducted by the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters, we were expecting government to introduce legislation. I'm wondering if you've been consulted on the drafting of any electoral legislation by the government.
Senator, we have had the opportunity to provide from an operational perspective, what legislation may well mean for us in terms of implementation.
So that was a very clever way of answering that question, but I'm wondering if you have seen any legislation that you have then been asked to comment on.
We've seen legislation that we have provided some operational comments around.
Thank you.
Implementation.
We discussed at the last estimates that these reforms are likely to be quite significant. At the last hearings, the Commissioner said that the AUC would find it very difficult to implement any reforms in time for the next electoral event, barring a significant increase in your resourcing. Obviously, we're now further along and we haven't seen any legislation introduced. What's your assessment of how feasible the changes will now be before the next election?
Well, that's very difficult for me to comment on when I think that's going to be a matter for Cabinet and Parliament to consider should the legislation progress.
So if there is changes, significant changes, as have been mooted, to electoral legislation, do you agree with your predecessor that without significant increases in resources, the AUC would be unable to implement such changes before the next election?
I'd certainly say, Senator, we're in a period of very high complexity in terms of implementing a lot of legislative reform before the next election, whenever that election is likely to be called.
Yeah, so it's a little bit late in the cycle to be doing anything substantive.
It's incredibly challenging.
Thank you. I'm not after, obviously, seeking an opinion on any of these reforms, but does the AUC have a ballpark on how it might implement some of the recommendations of that JSCAM report and potentially what new resources you might need?
Senator, that's going to be almost entirely informed by what the final legislation looks like. And as we know, what comes out of Cabinet and parliamentary processes can be quite different sometimes to what goes in them. So it's work in progress, but not yet something that we're able to finalise.
Okay. It's proposed in that JSCAM report that the AUC should be charged with the enforcement and management of truth in political advertising. We have canvassed this issue at previous estimates, and I know what your predecessor thought of this issue. It's on the Hansard record. Has the AUC considered how it would manage that responsibility from your perspective?
Again, Senator, we've provided some operational advice with respect to that matter.
So work has been done around how the AUC would operate should that responsibility fall to them, how you would manage that requirement?
Yes, we've operationally turned our mind to what the potential implications would be if that legislation was passed.
How will the AUC manage the impact of AI-generated material in the determination of truth?
Well, Senator, we're not the arbiters of truth. That is not the role of the AUC at the moment, and my view is exactly the same as Commissioner Rogers' view. That is not the role of an independent electoral commission unless Parliament decides otherwise. So therefore, we wouldn't have any role in determining any artificial intelligence matters that would impact on truth with respect to the election. The only point that I would make, of course, is we have a very proactive role when it comes to the electoral process. So if there's any artificial intelligence that's circulating around that is inaccurate with respect to the electoral process, then we'll take a very active role, as we currently do now with mis and disinformation on electoral processes.
Thank you. Minister, can you give us a heads up as to when that legislation may be introduced into Parliament?
I hope very soon, Senator.
Imminently.
Imminent.
Thank you. There's been a significant change in the electoral landscape, obviously, since the 22 federal election. The introduction of AI is just one of those changes. I'm wondering what work the Commission has done to look at the influence of AI on electoral events overseas. We've since had an election in the UK. We're about to have one in the US as we speak. I wonder, then there are plenty of other jurisdictions that have seen changes of government or electoral events. What is it that the AUC have done to better understand their experience with this new phenomenon?
Senator, look, we've done an awful lot, and as we all know, this has been the year of elections with more than half the world's population around, voting. So we've been monitoring elections around the world incredibly closely, engaging with our international counterparts. We held, even here in Canberra not that long ago, what we called the Canberra series on electoral integrity, where we had the UK Electoral Commissioner join us virtually. We had the Canadian Electoral Commissioner, the Swedish Electoral Commissioner, and many others from nationally and internationally coming to Canberra to talk about matters of electoral integrity, which included matters of artificial intelligence. We've also obviously been engaging with tech companies and social media companies. I might say at the moment, and I know we're on the eve of the US election, so things can change even tonight or tomorrow. But our general observation from all of that engagement and monitoring of the environment has been, whilst there has been some artificial intelligence, there hasn't really been a huge amount, and there hasn't been really much that has directly or even indirectly impacted on the election outcome from what we can assess. So I think it's still very early days with respect to the technology of artificial intelligence, its efficacy, its usage and its acceptance. And we're seeing that there is some tentativeness around the use of artificial intelligence where they are concerned about potential backlash from electors who are consuming that information through, particularly through deepfakes. So it's very interestingly poised at the moment as to whether this will actually become the huge problem that some people have predicted or not. But the evidence at the moment is not overwhelming. But as I said, if I might just footnote that, that could change in the next few hours or in the next few days, and we are watching incredibly closely.
It's very timely that you're here. Does the AUC have tools that combat the use of AI that might undermine your work to inform voters of the electoral process?
Well, I guess maybe we should talk about some of the measures that are in place. I mean, if artificial intelligence is distributed by a Part 20 entity, then of course it needs to be authorised.
Yep.
So, you know, we have a very strong regime in place here in Australia with respect to authorisations. So, you know, firstly, that is, I think, an excellent measure. But of course, that only relates to Part 20 entities and may not relate to the 21-year-old in the garage who's incredibly gifted with respect to artificial intelligence and deepfakes,
foreign actors,
or potentially foreign actors. We have been, as you would know, and we will continue to be running our stop and consider campaign with respect to digital literacy and really promoting the digital literacy in and around the election for electors to make sure that they stop and consider the source of the information that they are consuming. We'll be putting education and awareness around artificial intelligence on our website, and we're working on that at the moment. We continue to work closely with social media companies, and social media companies signed a artificial intelligence accord in Munich a few months ago at a election security conference, I believe. And a lot of that accord related to deepfakes and the rules that social media companies will be putting in place around deepfakes. And we'll be writing to those social media companies that are here in Australia, asking them to make sure that those rules are in place and that they'll be abiding by that accord during the federal election.
Let's hope you have more luck with the social media companies than the government does. Can I ask what work's underway to protect us from foreign interference with AI? Is that work that you're referring to there specifically about domestic, or does it include foreign interference?
Well, that's probably more specifically around domestic. With respect to foreign interference, we of course are really blessed in Australia, to be honest, because it's a world-leading model to have the Electoral Integrity Assurance Task Force in place, which has been in place since 2018. And the Electoral Integrity Assurance Task Force, just like the AEC, is ready and raring to go for the election. It's met many times throughout the year. It's formed a number of times throughout the year to support state and territory elections, and that will be the primary mechanism where the monitoring of all things foreign interference will be occurring.
Was that task force in place for the referendum?
Yes.
Was there any indications of efforts of foreign interference during the referendum?
No.
Thank you. I want to ask some questions about legal matters regarding authorisations. You mentioned authorisations before. It's correct that the AEC undertook consultation on a new authorisation determination. Is that correct?
Yes.
But that process has since been abandoned?
Yes, Senator. We consulted with all Part 20 entities. We got some good responses back, but let's say diverse views, which were difficult to quickly reconcile. So we decided that it was getting too close to the potential election period for us to try and work our way through those diverse views and try and find the best way forward. And it risked, I think, causing some confusion late in the electoral cycle. So we decided to cease that process for the moment, reaffirm with all entities that the current determination continues to exist for the next election, and our intention is probably in the second half of next year to pick up that consultation process and progress it where we possibly can.
Okay. So I just want to understand whether the responses you got were short and informal, or whether they were more detailed responses from the entities.
We got both and everything in between. We got some short responses, we got some very detailed responses, and everything in between.
So will there be updated guidance for the current determination?
Yes, there will.
There will be.
And we're working very actively on that at the moment to update our advice and guidance. Update our guidance, provide that in a more modern manner, which is easier for entities to utilise and access.
And will you be consulting with the political parties and other interested parties in advance of that guidance preparation and distribution?
Well, I would say that consultation has been ongoing through the interactions that we've had with the parties, both at election time and outside of election time. And we get some rich feedback, which we've been taking on board.
Senator Hugh, may I interrupt you now to note it is 11:15. how do you propose?
I think I've probably got another 5 minutes or so for the AEC. I'm not sure whether other senators have questions for the AEC.
I'm going to ask you how you propose to finish the evening in terms of getting through the remaining 2 agencies in the next 15 minutes.
It depends whether you would like to kick on, as we did last night. I think that the questions that I have for the PWSS and IPIA are reasonably brief.
I would require, in order to do that, a very firm commitment on what time we concluded. That would also, I think, include the agreement of officers at the table, the Minister and support staff. What do you propose?
I think we had that courtesy last night, but I think, as I said, my questions are reasonably brief, and I'm not sure whether other senators around the table have questions.
I have some questions for the AEC. I have no questions for the remaining 2 agencies. I mean, last night I think we adjourned at 26, 27 past the hour. So if we say, we call it stumps at 11:30.
And we have to okay with Hansard.
As long as Hansard and everyone else is happy.
If we can, I'd squeeze something in for IPIA on the way.
Yes. The opposition would be very grateful.
Other than I'll be happy to spill over.
Chair.
Well, given that I will just suspend briefly, but I'm happy to. Given that the Greens have not been.
Can I? Have you got the chip? Sorry.
Okay. We are now. Right. Thank you.
Right. I want to ask some questions about questions on notice. Did you say that the Chief Legal Officer is here, Mr. Pope?
Yes, he is, Senator.
Thank you. Okay. What's a serious offence? What's the definition of a serious offence?
Senator, I might take the opportunity to amend that language and say that the word offence should be replaced with breach.
Breach?
Yes.
So is a serious offence and breach the same thing or not?
I think breach is better language and more accurate in the context of civil matters.
Right.
Where an offence may have connotations of criminal matters. So that, our apologies, Senator, that's one that slipped past me.
So the question on notice 25 states that it's a serious offence to publish an electoral advertisement opposing a candidate without proper authorisation, but we're changing the word serious offence to breach.
Yes, please.
All right. Okay. The same question on notice. I'm told the AEC did not, and nor was it obliged to warn the party that it was filing civil penalty proceedings against them in relation to advertisements. Well, this is the Geelong Advertiser, that it was considered breach 32(1)(d) of the Electoral Act. So this was in direct response to me asking about the legal services directions. I still haven't been told whether the legal service directions were considered before launching this action. Specifically, my understanding is that the LSD require that, endeavouring to avoid, prevent and limit the scope of legal proceedings wherever possible, including by giving consideration in all cases to alternative dispute resolution before initiating legal proceedings and by participating in alternative dispute resolution processes where appropriate. So my question is, did the AEC consider alternative dispute resolutions before initiating these proceedings?
Senator, I might ask the Chief Legal Officer to come and assist with that, answering that question. My understanding, though, is that the legal services directions were applied and considered as part of this process.
Andrew Johnson, Chief Legal Officer. Yeah, we follow the legal services directions in following good legal practice and principles, and before we can commence any action we have to get external legal advice on prospects and consider those factors up when looking at the nature of the offence and the other factors we have in our regulatory policy and what actions we take.
So did the AEC consider alternate dispute resolutions before initiating the proceedings?
No, we didn't.
Isn't that specifically what the LSD requires?
Not necessarily. The legal services directions say that you have to get the advice on prospects and weigh that up and consider the options then of what regulatory action to take.
Including by giving consideration in all cases to alternative dispute resolutions before initiating legal proceedings?
Yeah, well, so I guess that was considered in the AGS advice and what the offence was and what the action was that was appropriate to take.
It sounds to me like this is an interpretation of the LSD as opposed to a black letter response to the LSD. Is that right?
Senator, I think we sought advice with respect to this particular matter in the context of the legal services direction, and the advice has led us down the pathway that we're currently down.
I want to turn to question on notice 20. At the last hearing, Commissioner Rogers told me that he seeks to be a model authoriser for content from the AEC, and that entities should be able to look at the AEC's channels for examples on how to properly authorise matters. In the question on notice, in direct response to this, Hansard, the AEC has said this means the AEC is not required to apply authorisation statements to our communications. While none of the last 20 videos uploaded to that Instagram account were required to feature an authorisation statement under the Electoral Act, as of Tuesday the 4th of June 2024, 7 of these videos featured both a written and spoken authorisation at the end of the video. So this means that 13 of the sample of 20 were not properly authorised. Do you accept then that the AEC has not been acting as a model authoriser, as the Commissioner told me at the last round of estimates?
Well, Senator, I think firstly, legally and technically, the videos and most of our other material is not required to be authorised under the Electoral Act and under the determination. We have provided authorisations against a number of our communication in order to try and assist in being a model agency with respect to determinations. I accept that it hasn't been fully and consistently applied, and that is work in progress, and it's something that I intend for us to try and address in the lead up to the election and complement and be consistent with the better practice advice that we'll be putting on our website with respect to authorisations.
Terrific. That was my question, whether there will be more care and attention paid by the AEC to its social media feeds to ensure that it's complying with the rules that it seeks to enforce on others. Yes?
That's work that we intend to undertake, yes.
Excellent. Acting Commissioner, I'm going to leave it there, but I have pointed to a number of deficiencies in responses to questions on notice that are at best a bit sloppy, and I could go on to further examples, but I won't. Can I just seek an assurance that the AEC will pay a little more care and attention to its future responses?
Certainly.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cole. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to move on. Oh, sorry.
I've got a question. Oh, sorry. Yes. Acting Commissioner, hello. Following up from questions in previous estimates, do we have a total cost yet for the running of the 2023 Voice to Parliament referendum?
Yes, Senator. It's $411.3 million.
$411.3 million?
Yes.
Okay. And that's the final cost? There's all invoices paid?
Yes. Final cost published on our website.
That's published on your website. Okay, excellent. Moving on to, at the last estimates, Mr. Rogers, I think, Commissioner Rogers said that the AEC sent out approximately 1,485,000 non-voter letters to individuals. Can you state how many people were fined for not voting at the referendum as a result of those 1,485,000 letters being sent out?
Fined as in terms of fines issued?
Yes.
Of those 1.4 million? I'll probably have to take that on notice, Senator.
But fines were issued?
Fines were issued, yes, and we actually also have some prosecutions underway around the country at the moment.
When you say prosecutions, what for? For not voting? Or?
Yes.
Okay. Can you say how many prosecutions?
I'm going to say it's around something 300 and something comes to mind, but again, I'm going to have to probably get some further advice.
Are these individuals who didn't vote and didn't reply to the AEC, or didn't vote and did reply telling the AEC that they were exercising their free will not to vote? Or words to that effect, perhaps sometimes less politely.
All of the above and a whole lot more generally, Senator. So there's a range of reasons that we may well take. And it's a pretty extraordinary step to prosecute somebody for not voting. It's not something we do particularly lightly. So we take a range of factors into account, including non-voting history, advice that they've provided to us, and so there's a whole range of factors.
Senator, the 1485503 figure that you just quoted is the first notice that goes to voters who didn't have a mark against them on the certified list. They're asked to explain whether they did vote, or if they didn't, if they have a valid and sufficient reason for having failed to vote. And at that point, they can choose to pay the $20 fine for failing to vote. Then we go through a cascading process of dealing with people who don't respond, but some people opt to pay the fine at that point.
Can you tell me how many people opted to pay the fine?
We could take that on notice and provide that detail.
And how many people of the 1485503 figure, how many people actually did respond?
Yes. So we can take that on notice, Senator, but to provide you with a little more detail, we go then through a second round of notices. We send a second letter to people who haven't responded to say we haven't heard from you, and we're now going to move into a second round and potential prosecution action. And so that inevitably sees a number more people opt to pay the fine, and we distill it down there until we get a number of people that go through to prosecution.
I have a series of questions. I'll put them on notice to assist the. But I just want to check a figure that you said earlier, and I think the Minister also did a double take. So how many people have been added to the roll? Was it 653,000?
At the moment, as at the 30th of September, 653,000 extra electors since the 2022 federal election.
How many of those were through the federal direct enrolment and update program?
I think we're going to have to take that on notice, Senator.
No, cool. No, so I do have further questions, but I will hand back to
Chair. Thank you. Have we concluded, therefore, PWS?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. We'll now progress to PWS, and we wish you all the best for the next election.
I'll be chasing.
We'll be all very busy together.
It is so true. Regardless of their political colour. Toilets for pre-poll volunteers. Yeah, you need to check it.
Thank you. I now welcome Ms. Leonie McGregor, the CEO and other officers of the Parliamentary Workplace Support Service. Ms. McGregor, do you have an opening statement?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Senator. Leonie McGregor, Chief Executive Officer, Parliamentary Workplace Support Service. Good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to update the committee on some key changes that have taken place since estimates in May this year. Firstly, the machinery of government change to complete the process of the establishment of the PWSS as an independent statutory agency has been finalised. This occurred on the 26th of September. We've published our corporate plan, and the first annual report for the PWSS has also been tabled. The advisory board are now fully established and have held meetings on the 29th of July and the 28th of October. Most significantly, our legislation has been amended to allow for the establishment of the Independent Parliamentary Standards Commission. The Commission began operations on the 14th of October. The PWSS plays an important role in supporting the Commission so that it can carry out its functions under the Act, and has established a small secretariat function to support the IPSC in the first instance. We expect that that support will be expanded in the future, depending on matters that the IPSC is considering at any time. 7 acting commissioners have been appointed, including the Chair of the Commission, Ms Vivian Thom. The 6 remaining commissioners are Ms Barbara Bennett, Dr Annabelle Bennett, Ms Mary Brennan, Ms Lynelle Briggs, Mr Colin Neave and Ms Michelle Wicks. And there is a separate process underway to make permanent commissioner appointments. Whilst it started life as a dedicated counselling service, the PWSS now incorporates a very broad range of functions and is operating as an end-to-end human resource service for parliamentarians and their staff, as recommended by Set the Standard and as outlined in our legislation. We have established internal procedures and practices so that we deal fairly and impartially with matters that we assist with, and as functions are added or changed, we will continue to review these so that they remain clear, robust and fit for purpose. Whilst I do not propose to provide information in relation to individual matters that the PWSS deals with, I am more than happy to answer questions in relation to our functions and operations, in as much as this is of interest to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms McGregor and Ms Grant, for staying so late tonight. I apologise for the hour. I will try and be as quick as possible. There's nothing tricky in these questions. I'm literally just trying to extract a few little bits of information and clarity. So we have asked questions earlier to confirm that the PWS is now fully established, that there's no outstanding machinery of government changes, that there's been a full transfer of staff, and that everything's kind of done, ticked off. Can I ask if are there any outstanding resourcing issues facing the PWSS, such as access to systems?
No, Senator, and I think, as mentioned in that earlier set of questioning, we do work closely with Department of Finance in terms of gaining access to any information that we may need from them, and vice versa.
And that's working well?
And that's working well.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Is it correct that the PWSS is able to make public statements in order to correct claims that are made about it, or processes that it is engaged in?
I guess, Senator, that it would be open to the PWSS to do that. It would probably depend on the matter that has been raised. You know, for example, in media reports, what we will not do is comment on any individual matters, and I guess, you know, so that, you know, if we were seeking to correct any of that information, we would not do that in the public arena.
Right. So my understanding is that under the Act, the PWSS is allowed to make public statements.
Yes.
And that was important in the original design of the PWSS to allow it to make a statement where it believes it's necessary to correct the record.
Yeah.
That's your understanding too. And obviously this would help to engender trust, and that's why it's there. So has the PWSS made a public statement yet? And in what circumstances? I suppose this is a difficult question because it's quite hypothetical. Would you do so?
I might take that on notice, Senator. I think it's a good question, and would probably be good for us to think a little bit about that, taking into consideration all those, you know, the fact that we do deal with some sensitive matters, and being clear that whatever public statement we make would need to take that into consideration.
Now, legislation, as you said, has been passed to establish the IPSC, and work has been done to establish that body within the PWSS. You mentioned the appointment of the commissioners. of the board, didn't you? Of the oversight.
Yeah, the advisory board.
The advisory board.
Yes.
That's sorry, that was the word I was looking for. Has the PWS been provided with additional resources to support the IPSC?
Yes, so there were resources provided as part of the budget.
Right. And what was the quantum of those resources?
I think it's around $3 million from memory. I'll just try.
Oh, 3.8 million.
3.8. Thank you. And that's over the forward estimates, or is it?
Yes.
On the establishment of the IPSC?
So that was the initial funding, so 24-25, and I think then that government will look at what's needed going forward based on the sorts of, looking at the workload of the IPSC.
Thank you. I saw an advertisement's been published seeking applications for commissioners for the IPSC. When do those applications close?
Okay, that is Department of Finance dealing with that. But
Sorry.
I think applications may have closed.
They may have closed already? I suppose the question really goes to when we might see an announcement of a permanent commissioner, chair commissioner.
Well, of course, we'll be consulting with the opposition about that, and when we have finalised those consultations, we'll make a decision.
Okay. Again, I sort of feel like we're having the same conversation 300 times in the one night, Minister, but...
It's only 3 times I've used that argument.
I'm wondering if we will see before the end of the calendar year, before the end of this term of government, is the intention to appoint a chair commissioner and the appointment of other commissioners before an election?
As you know, I consult exhaustively so that all of these decisions are made with as broad a possible support of the Parliament. I think that's vital, and that's the practice I've used in the past, and that's the practice I'll continue to use.
So,
as soon as we can, as soon as we can, and once that consultation process is completed, and I'm satisfied that the people that we're putting forward will have broad support of the Parliament, then we'll act as absolutely quickly as we possibly can.
Right. Good, because obviously until we have those commissioners in place, the IPSC is really in name only. It's not a body that's up and running. Can I ask how the department communicates with staff and parliamentarians, how PWSS communicates with staff and parliamentarians?
Yes, you certainly can, Senator. I might actually get our Chief People Officer to come up and talk about that, but it's a range of ways, but he has further detail.
Evening, Senator. Scott Mischke, Chief People Officer. I send out a monthly email communique to parliamentarians and their staff, generally including between 4 and 6 topics that might be of interest. And then intermittently, we also send out direct communications to employers only, which is a smaller group of parliamentarians and their authorised persons. And so, again, that's more targeted communication around topics of interest to employers specifically.
Okay. Obviously, the PWSS is available to more people than just staff and parliamentarians. It's available to all people that work in the building. How do you communicate with them?
So we do have an arrangement with DPS for any related content that they send out, that we include references to the support available through the PWSS. So we're usually listed at the bottom of a lot of the DPS communications.
Who decides what's contained in that email?
So it's content that is written by my director cohort, and then I clear that content.
Okay. Obviously, the PWSS needs to maintain both independence and neutrality. Is there consideration to the content of those communications? Obviously, the audience, by its nature, is quite political.
We absolutely do, and we also do take feedback on those communications. So we would welcome any Commonwealth Parliamentary Workplace participant who has feedback around those communications, and we review that then for...
How do they reach out to you if they have feedback on those communications?
They're most welcome to email or call.
And they do.
And they do?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. I want to turn to the independent review of resourcing of parliamentarians' offices. The resourcing review, we referred to that earlier. That was scheduled to conclude by the end of October. I wanted to understand whether the government had now received that review. The minister said that he would take that on notice, but you guys might have a better idea.
We've got some, yes, Senator. Very close. So the process will be that I will receive the review. The reviewer is sitting here next to me.
Yes.
But I understand that it is very close, so I expect to be getting it pretty soon, and then once considered, I will pass it on to the minister.
To the minister. And can a copy be provided to the committee once it's gone to the minister?
Well, that will be a matter for the minister.
I would normally consult with the relevant shadow minister in the opposition about these things, as you would be aware. Senator, I'm extremely consultative about these things. Whether we go broader than that, let me think about that.
Okay. And we have already discussed the timeline and the budget allocation for the response to the review, so I will not re-ask those questions. Chair, I'm finished with my questions for the PWSS. I'm not sure whether other senators around the table have questions.
Chair, just a clarification from you. Did the Greens ever indicate a desire to be here to question the PWSS?
Yes.
Oh, they did?
Well, I believe that was putting them on notice. But,
Okay, right. Obviously the cameras weren't going to be here at this time of night, because otherwise very sanctimonious on such issues. Anyway, sorry, just checking.
yes, well, you would have been hard-pressed to justify getting them to sign a spillover letter on that basis. But anyway.
Questions about these issues
I have plenty of questions, but I'm much happier to ask PWSS privately when I'm not so tired. So, thank you, and thank you for the excellent support you give my office. It's been very valuable.
Do you want those statements tabled?
So we can now invite Ms Nicole Pearson, the Acting Chief Executive Officer, and other officers of the Independent Parliamentary Expenses Authority to the table. Thank you. Ms Pearson, do you wish to make an opening statement?
Good evening, Chair. Nicole Pearson, Acting Chief Executive Officer of IPIA. I do not.
Given the hour, that's a wonderful thing to hear. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms Pearson, and to IPIA for appearing tonight. I think this is the first estimates you've appeared as Ms Pearson as the Acting CEO, or is this the second one?
Maybe the second.
Okay, sorry. I was about to congratulate you. It is night. It is very late tonight. I only have a few questions, but I did want to get them on the record, so I apologise for the late hour. Over the last year, we've seen the process of the restarted reporting of parliamentarians' expenditure being published. How has the process of publishing those reports gone?
It's gone very well. We've caught up and thanks to all of you for rolling out 8 reports between December last year and August this year. We're on normal schedule now, so the 1st of July to 30 September report currently has been certified, and we're looking at publishing next week.
Okay. And have any issues been identified through this process since February?
No issues that I'm aware of. I think everyone's aware that some of the data is a little bit untidy in terms of ons and offs with travel, which we talked about before. But the actual process of having the reports published is working well from my perspective, and the certification can be manual, which I think is appreciated by parliamentarians, as well as be electronic. So I think it's okay.
Okay, good. That's very good news. So, and I'm sorry, the expected dates for the remaining quarterly reports, did you mention that?
So we're up to date, and now the July to September 24 quarter will be published next week.
Fantastic.
Then I'm going to give everyone a little break till the end of January, and we'll start last week in January with the October to December quarter, and we'll go quarterly from there.
Okay, terrific. I want to ask you about pre-election preparation, and then we will let you go unless there are other questions around the room. So IPIA sees an increase in travel and expenditure claims at elections. That's the case, yes? I assume. I'm seeing lots of nods around the table for the sake of Hansard. Has work commenced to provide guidance to all parliamentarians and staff on travel and expenditure during elections?
Thanks for your question, Senator. I'm going to pass to Mr Frost to answer that one.
Thanks, Senator. Michael Frost, Branch Manager of Travel Education and Advice. Yes, we have begun preparing material. We have also attended a number of meetings with some stakeholders, including the Office of the Prime Minister, Special Minister of State, your office as well, and the Leader of the Opposition's office, just to have those initial discussions. As we know, the election hasn't been called and we don't know a date, so we're on the front foot, meeting with officers, talking through workflows and how the travel would work, and getting that documented, and we'll get it back out in the next few weeks, I think, to all parliamentarians and staff.
Right, so that advice to all parliamentarians will be finalised and out to parliamentarians in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I won't say finalised.
That's a very Minister Farrell kind of date.
First,
give me something a little more precise.
The first set of data, there'll be pretty ongoing communications, but the first set will be out by the, I'll say by the end of the year, but we hope to have that sooner.
So we're talking about fact sheets and things like that.
Workflows.
So and workflows. Yeah, I would expect in December.
Okay. And will the advice be consistent with the advice provided during the last election, or is there anything that's changed?
I'm going to hand over to Michael in a moment, but nothing changes with election travel. It is the same travel, the same obligations as you have in normal travel. Michael.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The guidelines will spell that out, and they're really just helpful guidelines. Obviously, there are some changes around election travel. Some officers and staff will have more travel than others. Some will be focused on their electorate. Others will focus on higher issues. So we'll support all those arrangements.
Okay. I know that senators in particular are interested in this because they tend to have more travel than do members of the House of Representatives, and they also, because some of us are up for election, some of us are not, there can be some confusion, but the understanding is if they apply the rules that have always applied to them as parliamentarians, and if they apply the rules that they applied for the last election, they should be okay. Is that right?
That's correct. But please give us a call if you're in doubt, and ring the advice line and we will help.
Okay. I think that there is a heightened awareness among parliamentarians around travel expenditure right now, and I think that there would be, we greatly appreciate an updated advice. Thank you. All right, that's all the questions I have, Chair. Oh, yes?
Sorry. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, officials. What is IPIA's role in relation to the use of or reporting of special purpose aircraft movements?
So, Senator, our role is only in a cost recovery for certain persons that travel on a SPA. We were consulted on the guidelines, but we don't actually have a role in the actual assessment of who travels on the SPA. In terms of reporting, we have a direct link from our website to the Defence website, and Defence does the reporting of SPA.
Thanks, Ms Pearson. I'll come back to reporting in a second. How was IPIA consulted during the development of the new guidelines?
So I attended the meetings with the Department of Finance and Home Affairs and Defence. So I was a party to those meetings. So
you're invited to the working group?
I was invited to the working group, yes. And so I attended, and we had the draft guidelines at different stages to go through and comment on.
Does IPIA believe that the final guidelines achieve the necessary levels of transparency and accountability?
In terms of our own transparency, in terms of...
In terms of the transparency for the expenditure of public funds on travel by members of Parliament?
I think that that's probably a question for the Department of Defence, because they're decisions that are made by Defence, not by IPIA.
Those guidelines are a long way removed from how IPIA reports the travel of members of Parliament, aren't they?
It's different reporting, yes.
Yes, including by ministers. If Senator Farrell uses a special purpose aircraft, when he's used that special purpose aircraft is removed from the public record, but if he catches a commercial flight, it's on the public record.
That is correct.
Are you able to explain why that
the
information needs to be treated differently?
I think that the reduced reporting is a matter for Defence, and that's a decision that they have taken. In relation to IPIA reporting, I think you're making reference to a conversation we had last year about the advice around pattern of life, and that was certainly part of the discussions that we had with the guidelines and the decision. Well, we rely upon our policy agency, which is Finance, to form an opinion about whether our reporting needs to change, and that wasn't raised with us as an issue, and we have not seen a reason to change how we report at this stage.
So you've tested with government, with Finance, whether the reporting IPIA does on members of Parliament travel needed to be varied to address pattern of life concerns?
I think we've had broad discussions some time ago about whether there would be any policy advice change that would mean that IPIA would change how it was reporting, and the decision was there was no advice that came through requesting us to change how we were reporting.
Okay, thanks, Ms Pearson. I'll take that aspect back up with Finance, although Minister again highlight the glaring inconsistencies. I'm not necessarily coming down strongly in favour of one or the other, although I think a fair degree of transparency is essential, but there are glaring inconsistencies that I don't think are defensible. But I'll ask some questions on notice to Finance about their advice and any analysis they undertook. Just back to reporting for a moment. Is IPIA provided with Defence's quarterly reports on the use of SPAs?
Not the quarterly reports, no. They handle those and publish those themselves. We receive certain information about individuals that have travelled. We only require a small amount of information to make our assessment of around budgets and reimbursements, and we only receive that information.
Okay. And how frequently is that information provided? Is it a contemporaneous flow or on a particular reporting cycle?
Pick that up.
We've only in the last few months caught up with all of that information, so we haven't really got into any pattern at the moment. But it's imagined to be something like monthly. We'll go through that data, make that assessment of those budget-related expenses, put those against the system so that those can be budgets can be adjusted with those amounts of money. But we haven't really got into some sort of permanent arrangement with that data at the moment. But we're hoping it's something like monthly.
How far behind was it in terms of needing to catch up?
There was data back to December 2021, but it's all caught up now.
Okay. And why was there that lag in the provision of that data to IPIA?
Senator, we probably had these discussions last year that at the time the information was not forthcoming from Defence and we were awaiting that to restart.
Even just in terms of the information you need to be able to make assessments about reimbursements and the like?
Yes. Okay.
So you've now had to go back and pursue reimbursements dating back to 2021?
Correct.
Okay. And is that process running smoothly?
That process is complete and the affected parliamentarians have been notified, they've been informed and budgets adjusted, so that process has been undertaken.
Are they all still parliamentarians?
I think I'd have to take that on notice, but likely there's a couple that aren't.
Okay, thank you. Are you aware of whether Defence is late in publishing its quarterly use of SPAs?
I think they are on a different time frame to us. I don't think they're up to this quarter, but I'm not sure what the last quarter that's been published is. You'd have to ask Defence. I have to look on the website. I haven't looked.
Thanks, Ms Pearson. Maybe it will appear tomorrow because that's probably a good take out the trash day. Thank you.
On that note, we will adjourn our estimates. We are back again, of course, on Friday, and we will see people for cross-portfolio Indigenous matters. I want to sincerely thank all of the agencies that appeared today, the ministers. Thank you, Senator Farrell, my parliamentary colleagues, all of the advisors, Hansard, attendants, security, Comcar, and everyone have a good night's sleep, please. Thank you.